Good morning. It is Wednesday, July 23rd, and this is a joint meeting of the Education Culture Committee and the Health and Human Services Committee to talk about a very, very important topic, our early care and education framework and coordinating entity, and how we all work together to cover our babies and make sure that they're doing well. We have three items on the agenda today. The Bill 1125, which is the Child Care Coordination Amendments, then a discussion on this coordination of the entity and the designation, and then a discussion, obviously, of the Bill 2325 as well, the Early Education and Coordinating Entity. They're all interrelated, all connected. We are not going to take any votes today, but we're going to go through in a very methodical way. And thank you, Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez, for pulling together a beautiful packet as usual. Before we start, I want to wish Christine Wellens a happy birthday today, our legislative attorney. So happy birthday to you. So be really nice to her today. And really appreciate my co-chair, Councilmember Albernaz, who I'll turn it to now. Just last thing I'll say is we have 3 hours. We're going to go through as much as we can. And we're not going to take any votes, but we're going to talk through a lot of the issues in a very open, respectful, and fulsome way, and we look forward to that. And then we'll have another hearing. If people have thoughts, I know some members have suggested amendments. We can talk once we get to the bill discussion part. You can talk about those, but again, we're not going to be taking any votes today. But let me turn it over to my co-chair, Councilmember Albernaz.
Oh, there we go. Good morning. Good to see everybody. Happy birthday, Christine. Thank you all so much. I just wanted to make a few sort of context-setting comments as we get started on this very important conversation. And I really appreciated the packet because it lays out very nicely the history of what got us to this point, sort of all those decision points that we've made collectively as a group together. Because one of the really awesome things about all of this work is everybody has a very important role to play. We're all coming from different angles, but we all have the same goal. And as we all learned, and I especially, this is an immensely complex system that we're all working on trying to navigate. And with the knowledge that it's about to get even more challenging with all of the policies that are changing so rapidly at the federal level, the budget that we know is going to be devastating to a number of our providers and a number of our local governments. And so we must sort through all of that together. And the intent of the bill that we introduced, that Councilmember Jawando and I introduced, was just to continue this very important conversation and address some of the tension and some of the issues that have arisen since we have established this very important entity. And also adjust to information that's on the ground. And we are very open to trying to find that sweet spot and trying to make sure that we empower everyone and not make things more difficult than they already are, but to provide some clear lanes and a clearer path than what we feel is currently in front of us at the moment. And so this conversation will be very important, as Chair Jawando, as Council Vice President Jawando mentioned. We don't believe we will be able to sort through all of the issues today because there's a lot to go through. And we also, it's been my experience sometimes when you set an arbitrary deadline for a vote, things feel rushed, and we certainly don't want them to feel that way. And so this remains a very high priority. We'll see how this conversation goes, and that will dictate the next steps that we will all take collectively together. But I continue to believe strongly, and everybody in this around this table, that everybody has the absolute best of intentions and is trying to do their best to be able to move this work forward. So thank you all for indulging me in just some of those comments, and I'm confident we're going to be able to get through this positively this morning. Thank you.
Couldn't agree more. And we have Councilmember Mink is online. I see on the screen there behind us, and obviously Councilmember Lukey is here, and Councilmember Sales will be joining us online and / in person, maybe a little bit of both. So she will be here as well. I want to just, before I turn it over to our council staff, just want to thank HHS and COA, and thank you all for being here. I think maybe what we'll do, why don't we just have everyone introduce themselves now, and then starting with Ms. Lambert, going down, and then I'll turn it right. And then when we get to you, Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez, you can take it away.
Good morning. I'm Deborah Lambert from the Office of Management and Budget, and I work with HHS on their budget.
Good morning, Michelle Gallipoli, HHS Planning Specialist.
Awesome.
Good morning, Mark Hodge, Chief Operating Officer for HHS.
Right.
Good morning, Lori Garibay-Aquino, Chief of Children, Youth, and Family Services with HHS.
Good morning. I'm Kimberly Rosnack, the Executive Director of the Montgomery County Children's Opportunity Alliance.
And we know Ms. Wellens is our birthday person and our legislative attorney. Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez, you want to take us through the packet? Or Ms. Wellens, excuse me.
So
You're gonna
yes,
start?
thank you so much, Mr. Council Vice President, chairs, and council members. Good morning. I'll start you off with item 1 and then defer to Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez to lead you through the item number 2. Obviously, she should please feel free to jump in as well on item 1 and 3. So your item 1 is Bill 1125, Child Care Coordination Amendments. This bill was introduced at the request of the county executive, and it would do 2 things. It would remove from the current county code the position of child care and early education officer, because as explained by the county executive, this position that the duties are done elsewhere, and they are and that the position is needed elsewhere in DHHS. The position is not currently filled. And then the second thing the bill would do would be to remove from the code the provisions related to the Early Childhood Coordinating Council, since those duties of that council have been largely transferred to the Early Care Education Coordinating Entity, which is the Children's Opportunity Alliance, which is easier to say. I'll say COA. So those 2 things. So the idea is to essentially kind of clean up the code to reflect the current reality that this position isn't being used, and that the coordinating council duties have been largely subsumed by the COA at this point. And there are a couple of issues for your potential discussion, starting at page 4 of the staff memorandum. It's just pointed out that the committee might wish to talk with DHHS about the functions of the position that's being eliminated, and any other staffing considerations that they wanted to bring up. That's the first potential issue. The specific duties, and thank you to Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez for helping me identify these. There's specific duties that weren't, verbatim transferred. This is, sorry, I'm jumping to item number 2. So this one, there are duties from the ECCC that weren't specifically transferred to the ECE, and so those are there. Should the committee wish to walk through those or get the panelists' perspective on those. And then finally, the item number 3 is the question about the governor's Early Childhood Advisory Council, and basically just sort of if you would like to discuss in light of the dissolution of the ECCC, which had been designated as a state contact on the state's Early Childhood Advisory Council, the ECAC, in light of this transition away from the ECCC, how those duties with respect to communicating with and participating with the state will be handled going forward. Those are the, lowdown on the 3 items. Defer to you, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that. And the complexity of the acronyms is underscores the complexity of the system. So why don't we start with the first one? If HHS could just maybe start with you, Mr. Hodge, or whoever you on your team, Ms. Garibay-Aquino, why, just the rationale for why this isn't needed, the duties, where they're going to go, how you see this working, and kind of the impetus
Sure.
for the
Thank
bill,
you.
because I think that'll kind of throw us into the coordination and duties conversation.
Right. So from our perspective, the position itself, the child care and early education officer, the role of that was really similar to what a lot of our partners at COA are doing. We're to kind of bring our different entities together, serve as kind of an overall guidance in the field of what's happening in early care and child care. So at this point, that role is kind of duplicative of what the entity is currently doing, which is why we submitted this.
And Ms. Resnick, you agree? Your testimony said so, and I think I'd like to start with some agreement here.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Yes. So we are in agreement. I think it is my understanding that the state and local ECAC have somewhat been separated, and so we have put forward as the county that the Children's Opportunity Alliance will serve as the local ECAC and therefore have a seat on the state ECAC. So I think everything is in alignment. Yes.
Do colleagues have any questions? Yeah. Councilor Robin? Button's telling.
Thank you. So just, have we seen an evolution recently in the ECAC? So just would love your thoughts on, because we know what it looked like in the previous administration, and the partnership with the state is so critical. So it makes a heck of a lot of sense for you all to be at that table. I'm glad you are. But just if we could spend a few moments, since as we talk about the systems building, the state is such a critical partner, and is our role a productive one, or should we be, have a separate conversation about how to make it even more productive than it already is?
So I would actually ask if I can phone a friend on this one with
Yeah.
Laura in the back, because she is the one from our team who attends all of those state level meetings and supports our state level advocacy. So she could speak to that more clearly than I could. Is that
Awesome. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good morning, Laura Jerome, Manager of Strategic Initiatives for the Children's Opportunity Alliance. I've been a member of the team for the last 3 years and liaised with the state on this. So the state has given the county the opportunity to name who it wants to be the local ECAC, and we have suggested that it will be the Children's Opportunity Alliance Common Agenda Steering Committee, and they have accepted that. So all communication is going through our staff team, and it's in good order. We have regular check-ins with the staff team at MSDE about it. And I will say a lot at MSDE is in flux.
Yeah.
Right? So there is new leadership, specifically in the Division of Early Childhood. We have established a relationship with the new Sarah Neville Morgan, Assistant Superintendent, I would say. So we are in communication with her. We've had a recent meeting with Superintendent Carrie Wright and the President of the Board of Education, Josh Michael. So they know about the work that we are doing, and they are receptive to hearing recommendations from us. And because the leadership is new, they are still in the midst of setting out their own plans and agenda based on her vision, which is not something that has been widely communicated publicly or transparently. It's a lot of what's been saying is that they are in planning stages, and a lot of that is dependent on the funds that they'll get from the federal government. So they are open and receptive and communicative, and yet progress is slow. And there is not much funding or bandwidth available for change. I think that we've seen in our relationship with MSDE and other ways that they are receptive to changes that they do have the power to make. For example, we had advocacy around the pre-K application format being very difficult, and this year they changed it from a Word document to an online form based on that advocacy. However, there were some things like the timeline needed to be shifted up, and because that's in statute and depends on so many other offices and the budget being allocated, that was not a change they could make, right? So they receive our recommendations, they do what they can, and there's a lot of things they can't do, right? And then I would say with the state ECAC, there are two advisory bodies at the state level, the ECAC as well as the Office of Child Care Advisory committee that meet regularly, that we attend, that we provide feedback, we provide written testimony when it's an option, and we continue to receive that information and dialogue that way.
Thank you. On a lighter note, ECAC sounds like a Sesame Street character. So,
Also going away.
yeah. God, don't get me started. I know, horrible. But what I'd like to propose, Mr. Vice President, if it's okay, is maybe we reconvene in November prior to the legislative session in Annapolis to get an update on where things stand so that we can collectively work on our advocacy efforts together and have one voice on that. But that's a very, very helpful background and update.
Could agree 100%. So let's make sure we do that. Councilmember Lukey.
Thank you. And sort of unpacking some timelines and facts, and I want to thank Chair Albornoz for his questions. But and because the acronym names are so special, I'm going to go with local body and state body for purposes of this discussion. Understanding that the state and the ECCC was the designee during the last state executive administration, correct? Okay. When did COA, as the local body's coordinating entity, take over the role that had previously been filled at the state body by the ECCC?
So if I'm understanding correctly, so the timing, the legislation was put forward to be changed to start having us take on that role. What the entity or the convening group that we put forward as being that local ECAC is our Common Agenda Steering Committee,
Right.
which met for the first time in June. So
Okay.
there was a period of time where the local ECCC was not meeting as COA was working through the Common Agenda and figuring out the next steps. So that work is starting to continue to move forward starting this summer.
Okay, because that's what I was trying to get at, is like, was there a gap in time
There was.
where locally we were not so attached to?
So we
I
did
mean,
our best.
I know you were doing your advocacy
Yeah,
for sure.
And we did our best to keep in touch with what was happening. For
Right.
example, one of the things that happened during that period was the state ECAC did have funding that were available to local ECACs. So
Right.
we did reach out and say, is there any way we can apply for this, and what are the
Parameters.
requirements and parameters and all of that. In the end, it didn't work out and we couldn't do it, but we're hoping that if funds are available again this next year, now that we have everything in place, that we could be able to apply to do that. And I will say some of the things that different communities use those ECAC dollars to do, we're supporting the blueprint supports, like what Children's Opportunity Alliance did, of helping local community-based providers with the grant writing and increasing that pipeline for pre-K grantees.
Okay. And understanding, just to put it all out there, we had a series of state superintendents of MSDE, right? So we had the end of Dr. Salmon's tenure. Then we had Superintendent Chowdhury for a while. And then Dr. Wright came in last summer. So she is just coming up on her 1-year anniversary at the helm of MSDE. And as I understand it, multiple offices, not just the early childhood division, but multiple offices were without staff and or leadership at the higher sort of policy decision-making levels. Is that your understanding?
I have not followed that as in detail as you have. I do know for the Office of Early Childhood, Dr. Shana Cook was there for a long period of time. I don't remember exactly when she departed, but she was then replaced with Sarah Neville Morgan. So that transition has been what we have followed, not necessarily
Gotcha.
many of the others.
Okay, and then noting that some of the changes are not changes that can be made other than with authorization in state statute and adjustments in state statute, and understanding that they are going through their strategic planning right now within that division at MSDE. Are you anticipating getting any notification related to departmental legislation that MSDE is going to be putting forward?
Sorry, I'm turning and looking at Laura.
That's okay.
Something I track on a daily basis. With regards to what?
With regards to statutory changes that would be beneficial to accomplishing the goals that you all have sought through your advocacy and that may have been relevant, of course, to other local bodies in advocating for changes in the early childhood space.
Fair. No, not yet.
Okay.
So we have not been told about any new regulatory or legislative change. We have been told that they are undergoing an extensive COMAR review, but we have not
Right.
been told of the timeline of when that will end or what the results of that will be.
Okay, so the COMAR review can go on, ad infinitum, right? You can keep doing COMAR review, and then there are dead spots, if you will, on regulatory change during the legislative session when regs sort of don't progress because the staff is all turned toward the legislative session. But because we are at the end of July already, which is insane, summer has been flying by, but because departmental legislation would be typically submitted by around Labor Day,
Right.
time is of the essence, and that's why I was inquiring about that and whether there had been any indicators of potential for them pursuing departmental legislation in the early child care space.
Unfortunately, no, that has not been shared with us.
Okay, thank you.
May I add one clarification, just
Sure.
in case it's helpful? The ECACs were developed during the federal Race to the Top initiative, which has since ended.
Right.
Since then, only the state ECAC is required to continue it to exist. So there has been a lot of changes once that initiative ended. The local ECACs are not a requirement, do not have any accountability, do not have any essentially authority or requirements. The only requirements come should there be funding available, and then we have to meet the requirements of the grants that are made for the local ECACs.
And
Those are very separate.
Race to the Top came into play, what, 2010?
Right.
Ended around
In the late
2014?
teens. Yeah.
Okay. So it's been over 10
been a
years
while.
since Race to the Top terminated.
Right.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it was funny. I was at the Department of Education when we did Race to the Top. So when you said it, I got like, oh, I remember that. So good that we're compliant, even though there's not much to do. We will, as we said, we'll come back, and I'm glad that everyone agrees. We don't need this other position. You all are filling the role. And if and when there are new regulations and or funding or grants from the state, you'll be ready and able to deal with that. So appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you for your work on that. I know that can be frustrating with all the transition, but glad we're doing what we're supposed to be doing in that regard. If there's anything else from staff on that item, I think we can move to the next item. Oh, excuse me, Councilmember Sales.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a quick question, only because I noticed on the last meeting agenda that the new state superintendent of schools shared their priorities for the upcoming year. Do you have any timely information that we should know about as far as what the priorities are going to be for the upcoming year, or what Dr. Carey briefed us?
We would have to look into that. I don't know exactly what you're referring to, but we can look at it and circle back.
Okay, this is from the ECAC agenda, the meeting. The last meeting was in May, the next one's going to be in August. And it said that the Dr. Wright provided the State Department's education priorities. So I don't know if it was a recap from 2025 or in anticipation of 2026.
I'm not sure. I would need to go back and look at that to be able to comment.
Okay,
Apologies.
thank you.
Awesome. All right, so let's move into the discussion. We're not going to act on this bill because obviously all of these things are connected. We'll do it later, but it sounds like there's good agreement here. So, Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez, are you taking the next part? Okay, so I'll turn to you.
All right. Good morning, council members. So for the second item today, the Joint Committee will review the Early Care and Education Coordinating Entity's designation requirements, and I will try to use the word or phrase coordinating entity instead of ECECE. We will also review the Children's Opportunity Alliance's, or COA's, compliance with the necessary qualifications to serve as the county's coordinating entity, as well as receive a presentation update from COA on their efforts over the first 3-year designation period. And I also want to thank our early care and education partners from HHS, COA, and OMB for participating in this work session today. A lot of time and effort went into the responses and information they prepared for our staff reports. So in 2022, the council enacted bill number 42-21, which is the Child Care, Early Care, and Education Coordinating Entity Established legislation. And that legislation mandates that the council has to designate by a resolution approved by the county executive a single nonprofit as the county's early care and education coordinating entity at least every 3 years. And so on July 12th, 2022, the council approved by resolution and designated the Montgomery County Children's Opportunity Alliance as the county's coordinating entity until July 11th, 2025.
Ms. Rodriguez, I'm sorry, there was one thing I wanted to say about the last item. Can I just pause you for a second? So the cuts that could be coming or are coming to early care and education from the federal level on this last item, one of the things, and then the big ugly bill that passed, and the cuts that will be coming to Medicaid next year, I don't know. I know nationally, I remember in my brain from a long time ago that a third of childcare workers were on Medicaid. I don't know what our number is in the county and how we would ascertain that, but it's just something to flag. You know, we had a health briefing from the health officer that, you know, we could have around 50,000 people at risk of losing Medicaid was their best estimate. I imagine there's some overlap with our early care education workforce, certainly families. I just want to flag that as something, as you're talking with the state, as we head into that, something to bring up at the ECAC and just to be aware of as this entity. I think that's something we just all of us just need to be aware of, because unfortunately we're going to be in a situation, most likely, where we're going to have to make decisions about how many people that have been kicked off. You know, how do we prioritize? What do we do? It's going to be horrible decisions, but I just want to flag that for all of us and just say that I know that's an overrepresented population a lot of times. So thank you, Ms. Rodriguez.
Alrighty. So we're just talking about how the county council designates the early care and education coordinating entity, and that they were required to redesignate or designate a county's early care and coordinating entity on July 11th, 2025, by July 11th, 2025. However, on June 17th, the council introduced Expedited Bill 23-25, which will be the next item for discussion, which amended the duties of the coordinating entity and clarified membership of the board as well as some reporting requirements. So as a result, the council introduced on July 8th, 2025, another resolution to extend the Children's Opportunity Alliance as the county's coordinating entity until December 31st, 2025, unless otherwise suspended or revoked. And the intent was to help align the official designation with final action on Expedited Bill 23-25. So this staff report provides a history of the early care and education landscape in the county, as well as describes the role of the coordinating entity, COA's compliance with the designation requirements, as well as the designation options for consideration for the committee. And COA will also present on their work from July 2022 to today. And on page 3 of the staff report, you'll see a summary of the timeline of that early care and education landscape, starting with the establishment back in 2015 of what we just discussed, which was the Early Childhood Coordinating Council, as well as that officer position, and the Child Care Quality Enhancement Initiative as well. Since then, there's been plenty of great reports and information that was shared. The county and council helped establish the public-private partnership, which was the Children's Opportunity Fund, which was the prior iteration of the Children's Opportunity Alliance that was converted when it becoming the role of the coordinating entity. Montgomery Moving Forward, which is an important stakeholder in this conversation, released their call to action, early care and education, in 2018. And as a result of that, the county executive established the Early Care and Education Initiative, which is also an important stakeholder in this field. And the council approved a special appropriation for funding to Montgomery Moving Forward to help develop recommendations and research under what a public-private coordinating entity for early care and education would look like here in the county. So now here in 2025, we've had the first 3-year designation period of this coordinating entity as approved by the council in 22, and we are talking about designation again for the second three-year designation period. On page 4, it provides a summary of Montgomery Moving Forward's recommendations around this public-private coordinating entity. And the table on page 1, or table 1 at the bottom of page 4 specifies the specific criteria that they had recommended for this coordinating entity. And I'll note the original co-sponsor, of course, Councilmember Alvarez, and when they had introduced now enacted Bill 42-21, had highlighted specific characteristics of this coordinating entity, such as acting as a neutral convener guided by community engagement with a 360-degree view of the ECE system, a public-private board to reflect the entire ECE system of stakeholders, a focus on systems-level work and not delivery of programs or services, distinct racial equity and social justice goals and commitments, as well as transparency around the fiduciary responsibilities on all funds. And so that just kind of helps set up where we are today with the coordinating entity. So as part of the review of designation, the county code also states that the nonprofit who is this designee must follow the specific requirements to qualify as the coordinating entity, including specific requirements of the Articles of Incorporation, their bylaws, as well as the mandated board composition. And the legislation also dictates certain commitments that must be met around racial equity and social justice, the specific duties of the entity, and reporting requirements. So I'll just quickly walk through that. The first is with the Articles of Incorporation and bylaws, and that's easy. COA does comply with all of those requirements. You can see on circle page 3 their Articles of Incorporation, and page 6 links their bylaws, which is included on their website as well. The third requirement to qualify is around board composition. And so the coordinating entity's board requires 9 ex officio or government voting members and 12 other voting members as appointed by the executive and confirmed by the council. The table on the bottom of page 6 and the top of page 7 shows the current composition of the board by seat name and the person who's currently filling that role. You'll note that there are a few vacancies currently at this time that COA is actively working to recruit and bring on, as well as there were a few members that had their terms ending June 30th, 2025. The legislation required that the terms be set outside of the ex officio members who serve a life term, that there would be a third each having a 1-year, 2-year, and 3-year term. So there's some flexibility around there about reappointments and such for the completion of the 3-year term as well. So that is the board composition, which is currently in compliance. We'll note that COA has hired Social Justice Works, which are equity coaches. They've been a really great partner in helping to assess the entity and the board as itself, in that while they've noted that there's been some issues with attendance and decision making, that the strong leadership and trusted staff teams for internal and external outreach, as well as the work that they're doing with the equity coaches now, we're helping to move the board forward and addressing any of the issues around disengagement or tensions amongst the different board members, a lack of inclusive culture and relationship building, and resistance to change. So there's been a lot of great work on addressing those issues. And also noting that the COA has created 4 subcommittees of their board as well, one of them being the executive committee, and they're currently expected to hold elections again in the fall. So they were first elected in the beginning of their creation, and Kevin Beverly and Pat Rupert have been serving as the chair and vice chair of that committee for the time being, and the elections are expected this fall. Yeah,
I don't want to cut you. Do you want to run, is there a stopping point? Because there's probably a lot we could discuss on all of these. Do you want to go a little further and then?
Sure. I mean, if you would like to talk about the board composition, we absolutely can. Now.
Yeah, this would be the appropriate time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's just pause there for a second. I have at least a question or two. Maybe others do or don't. So the COA, you mentioned there's been challenges with attendance. Let's just start with that. Because I think the whole thing we're talking about here is how do we coordinate? How do we make sure everyone's on the same page? How does the entity, the coordinating, I don't know if anyone's seen the new Mission Impossible movie. Okay, I won't ruin anything. But the thing is called the entity. I'm not ruining anything if you haven't seen it. But that's what I'm thinking about. But this entity is not that entity. That's an AI that wants to kill everybody. But this one is a good entity. Just can you talk about, because there's been so 2 things I want to talk about: the attendance and then the vacancies. And you have we have vacancies on both sides here. We have vacancies on the HHS side, which we'll talk about, but then there's vacancies on the non-HHS side. could you just, let's start maybe with attendance. What is happening? What do you see as the challenges? First, like what are the challenges with attendance a little more specifically? And then have you seen improvement? What do you think? What are your suggestions around how we can improve that? Because obviously you can't coordinate, you can't be on the same page if people aren't there. What are the structural and other challenges to that?
Sure. So I'm going to pull back a little bit and say my background is in nonprofit management. And when you look at best practices of how to set up a board, typically a board is traditionally not 21 members, right? Like that is considered a very large board. I think that's first off. So I think in terms of attendance, on average, we have between 12 and 15 people who are there when we have meetings. I think we have very rarely had a full board, meaning a full slate where we've got someone in every single seat and we have every single person in attendance. That has just been very challenging. It's hard with schedules. It's hard to find the time. Even this last year, we set out a calendar from the beginning and said, these are all the board meetings for the entire year. Please put them on your calendar. We still wound up with that same 12 to 15 people in attendance. We've tried different times during the day, during the evening. I think also what we are looking into is moving into next year. If we have new leadership on the executive committee, do we send out a doodle poll again to figure out, again, with this new composition, what is the best date or time for us to be there? I think one of the other pieces we have put in place with our equity coaches, they suggested having accountability partners. So trying to build partnerships and relationships amongst members of the board so that they better understand each other's perspectives and can, I think part of what our board also struggles with is people being there for the seat that they are on or that they hold versus also being able to speak whatever is their perspective or truth as an individual of the community, right? So this even came up last night of, when we had a board meeting last night and we're talking about the legislation, someone said, okay, am I speaking because I sit in this seat on the board, or am I speaking and saying what I believe my personal opinion is on this issue, right? And I think our board members struggle with that part of it. I think we are also a new organization, so we're working through this, right? I've also looked at other different boards and talked with a lot of other different peers who are executive directors and how do they do this. Talking to Community Action Agency, their executive director doesn't lead their board. It is led by Leah Goldfein, who is a staff member, right? So is there some other way we could be thinking about how we support our board that it wouldn't be this traditional structure that we've leaned into so far? So I think we're trying to be iterative and to figure this out. In terms of the empty seats or transitions, those transitions for us have happened all throughout the year based upon different people moving, leaving positions, et cetera. So the empty HHS seat right now is Bibi Otero's seat. She left in March or April, I forget when it was. And so we've been working with HHS as well as the Beth Gokarek at the commissions and office to fill that seat. We are also at an inflection point and a transition point where many of our terms ended 6/30. Right. And so now trying to work on, I just got the email last night from her of who applied and interviewing those people and then working to fill and transition those seats. So it's an annual process that we work on. And I think the other piece or element to this is we do have a governance committee, but we have not had a steady governance committee chair on our board who is helping us steward and manage all of this work. We had Carmen Wong, who served there for a year, but she was our philanthropic representative and she just left the Marriott Foundation. So now we're finding a philanthropic representative as well as a new person to chair the governance committee. So I think it's all of those different elements coming together.
I appreciate that. You have anything to add on and I know you mentioned BB leaving, but is there, for the HHS ex officio, let's just very basic question. There's a DHHS 3 person. Who is that going to be and when is that going to be filled?
We haven't determined yet, but our plan is to fill it as soon as possible.
Do you have an idea of the?
I think we're still talking internally with our ECS team, and unfortunately Jennifer cannot be here today, but we are trying to strategize about who would be the best person to fill that vacancy.
Okay. What about this idea of the board being too big? Let's get to the elephants here. Obviously there's some colleagues that have a proposal to shrink the board that we'll talk about in due course, but that you brought that issue up. We talk about this a lot, and I've been on big boards, I've been on small boards. The workforce boards are huge. There's different functions for different things. Could you just talk? I would love to hear views on that.
I mean, I think it's a balance, right? Because we are trying to ensure representation, right? So
Yeah.
with that, it comes, we have 3 parents, which it's important to have that parent voice there. We have 4 childcare educators, 2 who are centers and 2 who are family childcare. And we did that intentionally because we need to understand those different subpopulations within the early care and education sector, But I think it is challenging just in terms of attendance to get everybody there. I think the proposal I saw wasn't necessarily limiting or changing the size of the board. It was more changing the voting of the board. But I don't know if you guys are board members, Deborah or Lori, if
Got a lot of
either
board members up here.
Nicole, if you guys want to
Ms.
comment.
Rodriguez Hernandez, you are free to comment as a board member. I don't want to put you in tough, but if you want, I mean, I think this is part of the issue. You raised a really important issue. Like, am I sitting here as a person as a father of 4 kids, or am I sitting here as a counsel? I know I'm sitting here as all those things. Right. And I think you bring your best self to the board. Obviously, some of us serve on boards that we have to vote on behalf of the body. And that's one thing. If there's a vote on something and you need to go and do your job. But outside of that, I personally think you should be representing with your expertise, what you bring to the table. You should be able to express that freely, realizing that might not be always in line with exactly what the person you're there to represent. But if there's a vote, you got to go with what your people that sent you there. So do others have thoughts here?
I mean, I haven't been on the board for that long.
Yeah, I know you're new.
But, based on our meeting last night, I would say that it was beneficial to have, not everyone was there, but it is beneficial to have the different viewpoints even within HHS. We have Deborah, who is able to bring in that financial oversight. We have Jennifer, who's more of our subject matter expert, and myself, who can kind of think of things maybe on a higher level in terms of strategy with HHS overall in the county. So I can see how it looks like there is a lot of HHS, but each of those, or each of us, including, our MCPS colleagues, brings a different perspective. And, from the conversation we had yesterday, I think that was really great and fruitful and gave us a lot to chew on moving forward. So I appreciate having a large board. And, we can definitely work with, Kimberly to see how we can better engage on our end or, help with getting people in person for meetings. But that would be my perspective.
Is it the same 12 to 15 people, or is it rotating? I meant to ask that.
It rotates, it shifts depending on people's schedules and different things that are happening. There have been some more chronic issues, and we are working to figure out kind of how to address that with specific board members. But in general, it tends to flux.
Do you have a policy around that? Yeah, because I don't want to call anyone specifically out, but obviously every board has this challenge. You got to show up and
we
participate.
originally in our bylaws had that policy, but it was taken out when it was reviewed by county council attorneys. So we
like
don't.
An attendance policy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So we don't currently have an attendance policy.
Ms. Wellens, yes.
Just to chime in, I think that it would be important if the will of the council is to provide that level of flexibility to the entity to remove members, or if they're, I think that would need to be addressed via statute.
Yeah.
Just to
Agreed.
footnote that, I guess.
That's good. Good point. I mean, I just think everything's on the table. We're just discussing how do we make sure you guys function well. So I'll pause here. I could keep going, but I want to get to colleagues. Co-chair Albernar.
Thank you. So I'll start from your context, right? So there was a lot of discussion and negotiation over the makeup of this board as we were developing the legislation. The executive branch preferred that the majority of the voting members be members of the public sector. And the compromise was that although the majority are not from the public sector, and the executive leadership is not from the public sector of the board, But, that was why the ratio ended up being what it is, with the majority being from the public. And some of this was based on personal experience that all of us brought to the table. I served on the Collaboration Council board for almost 9 years. It's a very similar makeup of a board. And I will say this, just staying positive, but boards ebb and flow. And the membership and the interest level and ebbs and flows. And in the 9 years that I was on the Collaboration Council board, we also, from time to time, had issues with participation. There was an underlying tension, conflict sometimes between public members and public sector members feeling like, well, they're being paid to be here and I'm here as a volunteer. That doesn't seem very fair. But on the other side, in order for this to truly be a collaborative effort, it was important to have all of those voices at that table. So there's pros and cons to anything that we're doing here, but I just sort of wanted to establish that context. In terms of the number, it is a large number. It is. But if we're going to have, moving forward, inconsistency in levels of participation, it's probably not a bad thing to have a larger number so that there's a little bit more flexibility to ensure that there's active participation and give people a long enough runway to be able to participate. I do think we need to revisit whether or not we want to give you guys the tool if you would like to have the tool. If somebody, for whatever reason, life happens, signed on, can't do it anymore, to give you all the ability to move on professionally, diplomatically, but not put you in a tough spot, I think we should talk about that. But I think, those are just, again, some context questions. So you all have had, my understanding, there's been approximately 11 votes so far as a board. And my understanding is that 9 of those have been unanimous. There was one early on with regards to the strategic direction that was not, and there was one because it involved finances of some sort where the public sector folks recused themselves. But by and large, there's been agreement. Would you say that's accurate among the board members?
I mean, I would say we struggle at times to get to quorum. And because we are following Open Meetings Act, we need to have quorum in order to open and start a meeting. We even ran into that last night, that come 6:10, we didn't have quorum in the room, but we wanted to start. So I think that is part of our other challenge. Yes, there have been 2 more challenging votes. One was related to the strategic plan in November 2023. There were 6 yeses and 6 nos as we put forward our mission, vision, and values and the work related to the strategic plan. The other one was this past August when we were voting on contracts. So we have an organizational policy that any contract or grant that is over $60,000 requires full board vote and approval. And so because this fall we were doing 2 large contracts to Minds in Motion as well as Goddard related to the $1 million that we received last year from council, we needed a full board vote. So that vote was 8 yeses and 5 abstentions. So the 5 abstentions were 4 out of the 5 were ex officios. 1 was a community member who just said, I don't know enough about what is happening right now to be able to vote. So I think those have been the more tense votes that we've had. But it is something we're working through, and yeah.
By and large, there's been agreement on most issues.
And I think we are striving towards consensus. And even last night, that was a lot of the conversation, right? Is how do we have productive conflict? How do we have each different person or group speak their truth and what their perspective is about whatever is the legislative change that is being put forward, so that we can then think about what is the impact to COA and our broader ECE community as we work to, I think what we all agree on is that end goal, right? We all want to see early care and education expand in Montgomery County. We all understand that that's important, but I think there have often been differences of opinion about how we get there. And so that, I think, is where there's been more tension.
Got it. The other, it's not an elephant, it's just a practical reality, is there already has been, and there's going to be even more transitional changes at HHS over the next year and a half as this administration transitions to a new administration. And even within this one, there understandably have been, moving parts. So that is a factor you know, as you're trying to figure out ensuring continuity and people having to get up to speed, and they weren't necessarily there when we developed. And I go back all the way to the COF. I was in those conversations when that was all first established. I'm not going to be around forever. So I don't know how to address that continuity issue, but we're going to need to. I love that Ms. Rodriguez Hernandez is our representative on the board, because she will provide that transition for this body, because we're going to have an entirely new council in a year and a half as well. And so I'm not sure if that can be done as a matter of practice. I'm not sure if we should establish a statute to ensure that continuity of service, but it's something we're going to have to think through as we move forward.
Well, and I think from the nonprofit perspective, what I think is that is our job as our board, that when we bring on new board members, that's part of the onboarding, is ensuring that everybody has that history and everybody has the context so that they can jump in. But as we've all commented multiple times, this is a complex system, and it's often challenging to understand a lot of the nuance. And nuance means a lot in this system, and I think it's on all of us to figure that out. I don't think we need anything in statute, but I think it's just something for us to be mindful of as we bring on new board members.
So 2 final thoughts for now, and then I make it back in the queue on this specific issue. But there's an entire industry that does board development work as consultants. Like, it's a complex issue, like in a lot of different areas. And so, and that's true in the private sector as well, not just the nonprofit. So I have a high degree of confidence we can figure this out in-house without having to hire somebody to come in, because we've got some really smart people around this table that have a heck of a lot of combined experience. But between now and our next work session, I'd love some more formal recommendations from you all, and ask that staff consolidate those so that we can take that into account. And if there do have to be changes to the statute, we do them collectively together. And we make those adjustments and changes now so that there is more clarity moving forward, and that we provide you all with as much support as we can.
I appreciate that line of questioning and the responses. And I meant to say this at the beginning. You guys have done a great job over the last 3 years. It's been a bumpy road. You had to interject into a complex system. So you're not only not the bad entity, you're a good entity. So Council Member Lukey, I think, had questions.
Yeah, I want to echo that. You know, admittedly, when I first came onto council, and I'm looking at all the acronyms, and I, you know, I was looking at some of the things you all were tasked with, where I'm going, okay, so that's going to be a challenge, but I embraced it, and sort of, here's how you can meet that challenge, or maybe you don't collect the data directly, but here's some other avenues to help elevate that information out to the public, right? You know, you've done a tremendous job. I have had in my own experience where there's been governing body or board turnover, where people raise the times of the meeting or what have you because they may conflict with other standing obligations that the designee might have. And every single time we attempted to find a better time, there was no better time. And for 9 years, we did that with one body that I advised at the state. And every time it was still the same. It was on Fridays, quarterly, period. So, you know, it doesn't hurt to ask, but it doesn't mean there's going to be a different answer. The one thing with the board composition that stood out to me, and I was, so HHS has 3 designees on the board, which was more than any other ex officio, if you will, except that one of the roles wasn't filled by an HHS employee. It was filled by an employee of the county executive's office. And so I was wondering if someone could speak to that, or why that was, as opposed to it being an HHS employee. Anybody?
I will hazard a guess. Mark Hodge, Chief Operating Officer, HHS. So when they're determining who should be on the board, that because BB in particular had all of this background and subject matter, and as a subject matter expert in early childcare during her work in DC and other things that she's done, I think it made sense at that time as we were getting Jennifer up to speed and others in our early childhood or early child care and education programming in HHS that it just made sense. And as a result of that, she became a strong board member in making helping to make decisions, and as a mentor, I think, for a lot of people within HHS as well as others. And so that's why that occurred. I don't think that that's a standing decision.
Right.
That moving forward, that somebody from the county executive's office would be in that role. I think having somebody from HHS fill that position is the expectation moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I just, I totally appreciate and understand that BB had specific expertise in early child care, right? Putting that aside, though, the law says this. That's not what happened. And so I care about, if it is going to be 3 designees from HHS, that they are in fact 3 HHS employees who fill those roles based on their knowledge, training, expertise, or their daily job duties and functions within the county. So I want to make clear that we are following what we put in the law and we are sticking to it. And so, but whatever changes ultimately unfold, as a result of the pending legislation, that's the direction we're moving forward, but that we are actually following what it says, because that wasn't necessarily the case. It was not about the person in particular, right? And we wish her well in her retirement, but that probably should not have happened from the get-go, because she was not, in fact, an HHS employee. She was an employee of the county executive. She reported to the county executive. That has significance, and that has meaning, and so we need to do better with that. But we'll cross that piece of the legislation when we get to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sales.
Thank you. Just since we're talking about the board makeup, I noticed in the packet some board challenges that were raised and concerns regarding lack of psychological safety, strained collaboration among board members, challenges with decision making. And so in addition to the board makeup, what can you share about this and how you're mitigating these challenges? I don't know if you've done a board retreat. I know you're having challenges meeting and getting everyone to attend the meeting. So if you can just share information so we're confident that you can still carry out your mission.
Sure. So we've done 2 board retreats. The first year we did not do a retreat, but the second and third year we did. I think some of the pieces I mentioned, so working with our equity coaches, they helped us establish accountability partners to build the relationships amongst the board members. I think also getting back to in-person has been helpful. We started at the end of COVID and everything was virtual at the beginning. And I think getting back to more in-person meetings has helped us build relationships and trust amongst the different board members. And I think having more conversations like last night where we can talk about how do we have productive conflict. And I think we somewhat shied away from that initially, thinking that we could have some sidebar conversations and work through issues, but that didn't seem to work. And so now I think our approach is to have these more open board-wide conversations where we put everything out on the table and we let people speak their truth and their concerns about what's happening and the implications of what's happening, and trying to create a more safe environment for people to be able to speak their truth.
Thank you. There's also mentioned, I may be skipping ahead, but it's related to the board's makeup and the decision-making process. A key recommendation early on was to develop a theory of change to guide discussions and decision-making. Have you made any progress on this theory or creating an evaluation framework to make decisions as a board yet?
So we don't yet have a decision-making framework. It is something we are working on. In terms of the theory of change, what we are hoping now that we have the common agenda in place, that now we do have joint goals that we all agree on, right? So even last night, as we were having the conversation about the legislative changes, we started by talking about the number of community-based seats that are pre-K state-funded seats, and understanding how many family childcare programs and seats are in family childcare, how many centers are doing state-funded pre-K, and how many seats that means, and what has influenced that system to change over the last 2 years, and how do we continue to do that moving forward, and how does that impact or help us all to understand our different roles that we can play to help influence that part of the work. And so I think also what was pulled up from even just having that conversation was, and MMF talked a lot about this in their recommendations, is the importance of us taking a 360-degree view with all of what's happening in the system. Pre-K expansion is one element of what's happening in the system, but we also need to understand the fears of our community-based providers that, you know, at the beginning, many of them said, we're fearful this will put us out of business. And then you also have the fears of what's going to happen to the infant and toddler seats. And so trying to understand all of the implications of all of these different decisions that are made is important. And so I think the closest I can say that we've gotten to that theory of change is now saying, okay, our goal is to get from serving 11,000 children right now to 18,000 children. So how do we then think about our steps and our actions to help us get there? So that kind of becomes our de facto theory of change, of that's the work we're doing to try to achieve that goal collectively.
So do you think by the next time we meet, you'll have a more concrete framework for how decisions are going to be made? And maybe depending on how these decisions go with the amendments to the board makeup, that could be helpful as well.
Yes, we can definitely prioritize that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Councilmember Mink.
Thank you. Yeah, as we're thinking through the board makeup, maybe this is a question for council staff, but how typical is it to have multiple ex officios from within the same department on a board like this?
We can pull up some documentation that discusses that, that we've analyzed and looked at several board compositions. Just give me a second to pull it up. But I know Ms. Wellens also did some research on it at the same time.
Right. I mean, as a general matter, I don't know that it's typical to have multiple individuals from one department. However, what I would say is that the whole way we have this set up, in which we say, okay, 3 people from HHS, 2 people over here, et cetera, is not how you would typically describe ex officio membership. I mean, typically ex officio, it means by virtue of this office. And so normally you would designate a specific position, like the director of the Department of Health and Human Services, or the director's designee, for example. And then maybe you would pull out another, you could say the health officer or the health officer's designee, or other specific roles within HHS. So it is a little bit unusual just to say 3 HHS people. And this also folds back into Councilmember Lukey's point, I think, about, well, the statute says 3 people from HHS, but in fact, one of those people was from the county executive's office. And I mean, one way to address that potentially would be to designate specific positions.
Yep, and in alignment with what Ms. Wellens said, from the boards that we were looking at, both in statute, that they're typically designated by position.
Thank you. Okay, so that might be something that we want to look at then for future consideration, and also looking at typically if those positions are from within the same departments, or are the departments diversified, and how voting is handled. I think there's some variation there, do the ex officios in votes, have they, certainly acknowledging the benefits that we have had of having multiple voices at the table and the different expertise that everybody brings, but just thinking about makeup and consistency moving forward and such, have the ex officios typically voted the same or differently from each other?
So you shared the stat, which I didn't even have, of how many votes we've had. I think you said 11, right? So there have been 2 where there have been not unanimous votes. The one with the strategic plan, it was a tie 6-6, and it was the 6 who voted yes were all community members, and the 6 who voted no were all ex officios. And then when we were voting on the contracts, it was a little bit more mixed. The yeses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 out of the 8 were community members. 1 was an ex officio who voted yes. And then the abstentions, 4 out of the 5 were ex officios, and 1 was a community member. So it's mixed.
Okay, thank you. So I think this is definitely something to think through. I know that we're not taking votes today, but something for us to think through as we move forward, and acknowledging also that, this attendance is difficult as discussed, and we had the community members are, the ex officios are salaried members of the county who are there fulfilling their job responsibilities as part of that, and so they are being paid for their time, whereas community members are not, and so that is a difficulty with attendance, and it's really important to make sure that they know and feel that their voices are being heard and valued, and and prioritized at the table as well as part of motivating attendance. So all important pieces to think through. Thank you.
Councilmember Mink, was that, you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Thank you for those questions. A couple folks have follow-ups, as do I, but I'll wait till the end. Councilmember Robbins.
Thank you. So in addition to COA's recommendations on board makeup, between now and our next session, I love HHS's too. So I think part of the challenge here is early childhood education crosses over multiple divisions within HHS. And that's why, to make sure that there are the right voices, it touches different divisions. But I do think we need to talk about, whether or not it makes sense to have one coherent voice. The challenge, of course, as I discussed it earlier, is we're about to go through a transition in leadership. So we just have to sort of think through all of that. But you don't have to answer right now. Jennifer's not here, but I'd love what your all's thoughts. I know you shared some of those in the memo generally, but more specifically, again, trying to identify these sweet spots here. And also what makes the most sense practically from HHS's perspective. Would love to get that recommendation.
If I can just comment real quickly on that. So just for clarification's sake, HHS having a voice in the room is different than having the ability to vote for something. And so we have lots of subject matter experts from across the department who intersect some way with early child care and education, that having that subject matter expertise in the room to provide information could be important to any discussion. Whether all of them need to vote is not necessarily, especially although it sounds like 90% of the time it's a unanimous vote anyway, based on what information was shared. But I think there's a difference, and we can provide these in recommendations, difference between who should be in the room to be able to provide information versus who's going to vote on that in the end. So, but we'll take care of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Councilmember Sales.
Thank you. I thought boards, committees, and commissions, I don't know if this is a question for Ms. Wellens or OMB, all volunteers on boards, committees, and commissions were compensated for travel, childcare.
Correct. The board committee and commission members generally are able to get reimbursement for childcare, for travel, for parking. So with respect to the, I need to check.
Non-ex officio members have access to those compensation documents?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Just following up on all the great points, in addition to the feedback around potential changes or adjustments, I appreciated what you just said, Mr. Hodge, about wanting to have expertise in the room, the voting versus non-voting. So let's create a baseline of the voting, non-voting. I know it's here, but just so everyone's clear, the millions watching at home, as I say, what's the current breakdown of? So we have how many vote and how many don't vote?
So of the 21-member board, all members vote.
Right. I'm sorry. Excuse me. So right now, even ex officio vote. That's why when you were talking about the votes, you were counting ex officio. So on some boards, ex officio don't vote. Right. Okay. So are there thoughts on that? And it seems like you opened the door, and that seems like you did open the door on whether everyone needs to vote. I would ask that you can share something now, or you can come back when we because we're obviously not going to discuss, and obviously Jennifer probably has something to say about this too. I would love to hear from anyone at the table, board member or not, about that. It doesn't seem at this stage that it's a huge issue with the votes that have happened, but we could anticipate that being something going forward. Go ahead.
So I think this has come up with our equity coaches as we have talked with them, and the difference between equality versus equity, and that many of our ex officios are in official roles where they have the ability to influence what is happening in the system. And so having 3 HHS voices compared to 1 or 2 parent voices, it doesn't always feel fair or equitable. So I think that is just a question that has come up. The executive committee and governance committee has had a lot of conversations about this. My board chair is behind me. If you guys want him to share his perspective, I'm happy to have him speak on this as well. But I think, I'll stop there.
Yeah, so there's 2 questions that you've raised, and there's actually 3 that are in my mind. So one is, should the roles be there? Councilmember Mink brought this up. Councilmember Lukey brought this up. Do you need that many roles? And I kind of brought it up initially. I said, well, why is the one open, right? Like, and who are you going to put in it? And the answer was, which I understand at this point because you don't have your whole team here, well, we're working on that. We're going to get back to you. But I think in the getting back, one of the things that's going to be important for me, and I think you've heard from other council members, is what type of person or expertise. It's one thing to just have it, but I think you need to say, well, we think because this person does X, it's an important voice. Like the justification will be important to me. Does that make sense for the HHS? Not just that it's an HHS role. Absent from despite the point that it was a previous person, it made sense. Even though it was not according to the law, you put the BB in it because she had expertise. It should have been, she probably should have been an HHS, like as was said, but you had a reasoning. So I'm going to want to hear the reasoning of why you think you need 3 and what the roles are and what they're going to face. So that's one area. The second is voting or not voting. And you've opened the door, and we've just talked about that. That's another level. The third is kind of what you're getting into, I think, is that even if they're voting or not voting, the presence of people who are experts can change the conversation. And I've certainly been in those rooms as well, and we all have. And it takes intentional, and there's a balancing. They're there because they have a lot to offer, right? You don't want to remove that. But you also have to have a meeting conducted in a way in the conversation and power dynamics to be set up in a way so that it's not intentionally or unintentionally minimizing, diminishing, quieting other voices in the room. But and I think what you've moved towards with the equity coaches and like having discussions in groups, I think that's a great thing because it can sometimes empower other people to stand up or help people speak, in coalition. So I want you to say a little bit more about that. Because it seems like you're suggesting maybe even presence might be the problem.
I don't know. I think there's a lot of different elements to it, right? And I think it's the unintentional part of it too. And the power dynamics is part of what we've been struggling with. And honestly, I think probably even as of year 2, we started kind of keeping internal data of who's speaking up and who's not. And what voices are we hearing predominantly versus what voices are we not hearing? And you could see trends, right? There were very few of our community members who were speaking up compared to many of the conversations being led by our stronger ex officio voices around the table, right? And I think what we have been trying to do, and I said this very intentionally last night with our board, is I believe everybody around our board table is an expert. They all are experts and bring important, valuable insights to share and bring into this conversation. And we need to be able to listen to everybody. And I think sometimes, and we've seen this over the last few years, there is a disconnect at times between what our systems say they are doing versus what communities feel they are receiving or being a part of. Yeah. And so that disconnect comes out in our conversations, right. And it's challenging to unravel that and figure out then what do we do, right? And I'll give a prime example right now. We put it into our budget to have a community ambassador program for early care and education moving into this next fiscal year. In the packet, in DHHS's response, it says that this is duplicative of what HOC, the African American Health Program, and the Latino Health Initiative is doing, as well as some other work that MCPS is doing. I can't remember who else was named in there. As soon as I saw that packet, we called a lot of those partners and programs, and they said this is not duplicative. HOC actually approached us and said it's part of their new strategic plan to share more information with their constituents about early care and education. So they want to make sure more of their resident advisors, I think is the title, know more about what's happening in this system. And they would love for those resident advisors to be a part of this community ambassador program so that they can make sure more information is being spread more broadly to their constituents and people who are living at HOC. They don't see it as being duplicative, but yet HHS says it's duplicative. And so I think there's nuance to trying to figure out some of those elements and unraveling those parts of the onion to get to how do we move forward. And that's a project we want to do with private philanthropic funds. We're not asking HHS to pay for that at all. And so it creates interesting dynamics as we try to move nimbly and quickly to address a need we hear from community. But the response from our partners in government is, nope, that's already being done.
Yeah, let's back. That's a great example, but I want to back up and I'm coming to you, Councilmember Mink, and then Councilmember Robert as well. Let's back up. We're talking about board management here, your partners, your several board members here. The recommendation that you've made for community ambassador, how did that recommendation generate? And where I'm going here is, why was it not generated? Why is it a response from HHS as opposed to it was discussed and before it went on a piece of paper, you all talked about it, and whether or not HOC is doing X, MCPS is doing Y, and the third partner is doing Z, why did your process of making that recommendation not yield conversation prior to it being an official response from HHS that other partners, regardless of whether they're doing that or not, it's not irrelevant, but I want to set that aside for a second. So how did we get to that?
It came up through the common agenda process, and there were members from MCPS and HHS who we invited to that common agenda process. It came up as a part of that work group. So right now we kicked off our family navigation work group last month. We have invited members of HHS and MCPS to be a part of all of our different work groups. So far we have a member of MCPS on our family navigation work group, but we have not yet received from HHS who would like to be on any of the work groups except for Jen Arnaiz has joined the steering committee. And so it was part of conversations that were happening.
But they weren't a party to.
They were a part of those. We even talked about it at the finance committee. Deborah was there. Jennifer was there. We talked about it and because it was in the budget and said, this is what we would like to do. And I think they just asked for more information. So we keep sharing with them more information.
Okay.
So they know they've been at the tables as some of those conversations have happened.
And then but how did the recommendation, because it's been in your budget as a part of the recommendation, when
It was
did the
put
response,
into our fiscal- it was
the
put into
response
our-
didn't come until we as council the council packet was put together? Is that when the response came? I see one of your staff members nodding.
Yes, I mean
Okay.
so what we had heard from them was they just wanted more information. So we were trying to
Got
provide
it.
them with more information. But a formal response came in the packet that we saw on Monday.
Okay, so can anyone speak? Jennifer's not here, but there's several of you here that were in some of these conversations. Can you respond from your side? Because for me, it seems like a dysfunctional process where no one's going to disagree that someone needs to know, there needs to be ambassadors that are telling people how to access early childhood education programs. Like, does anyone here disagree with that as a general premise? So, okay, the question of whether it's being done somewhere else or is it duplicative, like that should, I just don't understand. I'm trying to understand why that wasn't discussed and then it's presented as this adversarial thing, as we don't want to allocate budget to it. And I'm going to press you. I need someone to respond because that's frustrating to me. It's a good thing. If it's happening somewhere else, fine. But like, why are we not having that discussion? Why are we having to referee it in a council packet, which is what I feel like right now? Can someone respond from HHS about why you think that's a bad idea? Again, setting aside the substance, Ms. Resnick said you're wrong, that it's not being done there. That's a problem too, if that's the case. But just why it wasn't discussed prior.
I'm probably the wrong person to say
Yeah.
why it wasn't discussed prior because I wasn't here. But I do know that, at least from my understanding in my conversations with the team, is that these issues have been brought up. I'm not sure if they've been brought up in a formal board meeting or outside of that, but
The issues of duplication.
right, correct. In conversations with COA, from my understanding. So I don't want to say that this is the first time that we've brought up the issues with COA, that some of these services are being offered elsewhere. I think our vision would be for, we definitely agree that there should be navigators out there telling parents about services that are available, but we also would love to integrate what COA is doing with the work that's currently being done across the county. So I think if there were any issues, it's the fact that there may be two different navigation things that are happening. That's a separate issue that I know we'll get into later, but for sure I would say that our team has brought up those issues outside or before this packet.
The other thing I would add is we've had this conversation multiple times throughout the past year and a half about the difference between a coordinating an entity who is helping us to advocate and coordinate services in this space and providing programs. So one of the reasons we're here today is to try to clean up some of that language. And so if COA, for example, is providing a navigation service that may have already been duplicated or is being provided by other programs within HHS or other departments, the coordination and advocacy piece is missing from that. It's now filling a gap instead of making a coordinated effort to talk to everybody about filling that gap with the current processes. So that's I think the ongoing conversation that we continue to have, why this legislation is before us now and before you now, is to try to address some of those definitions about what COA is supposed to be doing, what HHS should be doing, what MCPS should be doing, where all of those pieces fit together. And so that's, I think, where the sticking point lies and why we're here with this legislation.
Is the core issue for you that it's not a coordination activity, or that it's duplicative? Because I'm hearing both things. I'm hearing like if the response is it's duplicative, that would suggest that you think it's already being done, doesn't need to be done. If it's a gap, as you suggest, it might need to be done, and other partners aren't doing it. Is your issue that you don't think they're the appropriate entity to do that, or what is the issue?
So I think it's both. I think it is duplicative because we have other agencies and other programs that are already doing this. But where does it fit within COA's purpose as a coordinating entity to do this work? So is it their charge to advocate for more navigation programs by the existing, as opposed to providing it themselves, which is what is on the table now? Is they're offering that as part of their budget to provide that service, because they, rather than advocating or coordinating it through somebody else.
So Kim, Mr. President, could you respond to that? And then I will pause to colleagues. You have to press your button. So the suggestion, why not get the philanthropic dollars and send them to HOC or some other to hire the ambassador to do what you're suggesting? And you've suggested it because you've identified the gap. I think
Yeah, so I think the reason why we see it as our role and part of what fits into our work is it is systems building. And when I get to my presentation and the example we share, it'll get to that and talk about it, because I think there's two different frameworks that I will put in front of you, and one of them you'll see in the presentation is the difference of downstream, midstream, and upstream, right? And so what we are looking at with this community ambassador program, it is a midstream impact, right? It is working with the organizations and other partners who are supporting children and families in our community and helping to ensure that they have all the information they need in order to help inform and support the children and families who are in their network. The reason why we see it as our role is HOC could do this, but they only want to do it for HOC. But we need to be able to do that same training for HOC, for MHP, for community school liaisons from MCPS who are coming to us and asking for more information, for it could be parents or whoever are those trusted partners in an apartment complex or in a neighborhood, making sure that they have all the information so that they can help families figure out how to navigate this system. And I think part of the challenge with all of this is there is so much work that needs to be done that not one entity can do this. We can't do it alone. Sure. HHS can't do it alone. MCPS can't do it alone, right? Yeah. And so I think there's nuance to saying it's duplicative or not. And we don't see that as direct service because we're not directly serving or providing that information to the parents or families, right? We are training the systems level navigators who are in community-based organizations.
More like technical assistants.
To have that information.
Got it.
And as we built out the agenda and what we have, the next presentation with the Family Navigation Group will be doing this is actually going through each session. We want to invite in HHS to come and share and have their family resource specialists say, here's what resources we have. We want our different community partners who are offering resources to be able to come in and share that and build that partnership so that there is synergy and collaboration there. And honestly, the other piece that visual in the presentation is talking about how our role is to pilot and see what works. And maybe long-term it goes to somebody else, as is what's happening right now with the grant writing and the back office support that we supported through other partners over the last 2 years. That is now moving over to HHS. They have now hired a blueprint coordinator. Their blueprint coordinator is going to be doing that work. And so then our work transitions to making sure that that work is happening and that the community-based providers are still connected to that work. But we started it and we piloted it. We had private philanthropic dollars to be able to start it, to be nimble, to get it moving, to start seeing the change. And I think the other visual I will share is the visual of the iceberg. And when you look at systems change, we are talking about trying to impact those events at the top. And our role as a systems builder is to come in and ask questions, to track the patterns of behavior, to think about how the system, what is underneath that iceberg, can start to move and interact and be different. And so part of some of these different pilots and suggestions is ways of us trying to make an impact and see if it works. Maybe we try it and we take that risk and it doesn't work and we need to do something else. And that's okay because we still learn from it. And so I think that is where, as we have talked with private philanthropists who are interested in investing in that system, that is the type of change they want to see.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm going to go to Councilmember Make. There's always the flip side of the risk of confusion, something not work, like because the system's so complex, there's the other side of that coin. I agree with you. Everything what you said made sense, but there's also the side of the coin of, is something already happening? are confused about where to go. Then there's no wrong door and you want them to go anywhere. So I get what you're saying. Very good point. We kind of went ahead, but it's okay. It's a good conversation. Councilmember Mink and then Councilmember Alvarez, then we will continue with the presentation. Councilmember Mink.
Thank you. I think very good points there from Ms. Rusnick. And I would say that the very fact that as a government body that we're seeing this work as duplicative I think really highlights the importance and the value of having a body that is bringing together government with the community, with our private providers, with parents, et cetera. Because if we're saying, look, we're already doing it, we've got it handled, we don't. And so it's really important that we have this forum in which we as a government, that our executive branch is hearing that this gap exists, and we have an idea for a way that it could be filled. And I think, yes, absolutely. Maybe this is something that when we see that this, the format, the structure of this community ambassador program, that maybe this works better than what we have already going. Now, then, it's been piloted with philanthropic dollars, which is great. It's been piloted on a relatively small scale, so we can see how it works. And then we have the opportunity to say, is this something then that would be more appropriately built into another existing structure, potentially, whether that's through another nonprofit partner or through an arm of our government or whatever the case may be. But we absolutely have members of the public, including on the parent side as well as on the provider side, who are very aware that families do not know, especially our highest need families, that there are many who do not know where to go and how to get access to quality, affordable, early child care. And so, there are multiple now other cited entities that this is ostensibly duplicative of, and I guess it wasn't an issue for them just to start doing these different programs. That's probably because they're reaching different pockets of people, but there is still a tremendous opportunity to expand and improve upon that work. And so that's the filling of that gap there. And so again, I think that the fact that on the government side, that if that is being seen as duplicative, again, really highlights the importance of elevating the voices of the public who are telling us, no, this is in fact very much needed. So much so that we've got donated dollars to go towards a program which could improve and expand upon that. And so, so I think that this is actually a great example for illustrating that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Alvarez.
Couple of points. So when we originally crafted the legislation to create the entity, we didn't envision at the time the entity going this far into the weeds. Now, I can understand as we've evolved and as we've moved and as things have been implemented, the need for us to have a conversation, whether it makes sense for us to adjust what was originally discussed and envisioned to reflect the reality on the ground and what's needed in the community, which is, as I said at the very beginning, about to get even more complicated. But in the initial charge and what HHS is working with, it wasn't what we hadn't discussed the specifics of this. And so it's healthy that we are having this conversation now, and that as the vision has evolved, that we figure out where we go from here. And so that's a good thing. But I think this also illustrates when this is really up and running and humming, the vision was that this entity make very substantive policy recommendations at the local and state and federal level. And I think I'm open to looking at the voting construct within the board, not going as far as some colleagues have presented, but open to looking at, just speaking for myself, open to looking at, where we go from here, and we'll get to that. But I think this sort of also highlights why there does need to be better discussion and coordination, because these conversations have happened, concerns have been raised, sort of informally and formally. This body has been leveraged in these conversations. Sometimes people come directly to us, to sort this out, or individual council members. And so I think that at the heart of this, when we're done, I know that it will be more clear, but this is a fundamental question, and I do suggest we get to the presentation because I know Ms. Rusnick addresses some of this in her recommendation, and so I look forward to that conversation, and then it will be helpful in a subsequent conversation to have Jennifer here because that will be key. But I yield back to you, Mr. Vice President.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think all this was very productive. The board, it kind of is at the core of how we work together and how the entity coordinates. So I'm glad we spent some time, but we'll turn it back over to you, Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez.
All right, thank you. There were a few more sections I wanted to walk through in the staff report before moving to the presentation.
And we won't interrupt you, I hope.
Please do if you need to. However, if you do think the presentation would be helpful in another section, just let me know and we can move forward with there too. Okay, so another commitment that the entity must meet as to serve, that the designee must meet to serve as the entity is related to racial equity and social justice. So the entity must adopt and implement a racial equity and social justice policy that applies the racial equity and social justice lens into all aspects of the entity's operations in alignment with the county's strategic plan on racial equity and social justice. The table number 3 on the bottom of page 7 and the top of page 8 outlines the specific requirements in the code and how the Children's Opportunity Alliance has developed specific policies for each of those, which are included in the circle pages in the back of the staff report as well. In addition, some of the things that we've been discussing as well have been related to the duties. So the legislation outlines 9 key duties to develop a system of high quality, accessible, sustainable early care and education, and eliminate systemic racism and structures that created access barriers for vulnerable, racially and ethnically diverse populations. And the county code also states that the entity must not provide the direct services or deliver programs for early childhood education. Council staff had worked with Children's Opportunity Alliance to develop a table that identified the multitude of activities the Children's Opportunity Alliance has endeavored on over the past 3 years related to each duty, funding amounts, funding sources, and staffing commitment to each. However, that is a big lift, and there's a lot of overlap between a lot of duties. And the COA is actively drafting this information for review by the board and the Finance Committee as well. So hopefully that can be available for our second work session as well. I will note that the COA does prepare the annual fiscal reports that are required on its activities and finances, and that the social justice work equity coaches that they've engaged have provided analysis on successes and challenges within COA as well that we've also been discussing over the past few minutes. Due to the early care and education coordinating duties, which are listed on the top of page 9 in the table number 4, which each identify the 9 specific duties, I'll note that unlike different reporting requirements on fiscal activities and things like that, there is no specific measures or metrics required to assess and evaluate the implementation of the coordinating entity framework. I think something that has been apparent as we've had this discussion, or metrics to periodically assess the effectiveness of the appointed designee as it comes to the council's attention to designate every 3 years. So council staff does recommend that the joint committee request an Office of Legislative Oversight report to help begin this work on evaluating the framework as it stands or as it will stand, depending on action on 23-25, as well as to help develop these metrics to assess the chosen designee throughout the existence of the coordinating entity. The Children's Opportunity Alliance presentation will highlight some of their accomplishments over the past few years. I will note that the COA has met and presented to the committee in addition to budget work sessions in October 22, March 23, November 24, and February 2025. And then also linked for your review is the annual reports identifying these as well from 2023, fiscal year 23 and 24. And something that was an accomplishment for 25 is that common agenda that has been in discussion. So do you want to turn to the presentation now or? Okay, I'll just note that in addition to the presentation on the successes in relation to the duties, there are requirements around reporting and financing and the relationship between our executive branch partners as well as the entity in terms of how they develop their budget and move forward in their activities.
I appreciate that. And just on the OLO report, I personally agree with that recommendation. I think it's always good to have more analysis and information and obviously need to do that in consultation with COA, and so I'll wait till my co-chair gets back, but I would assume others agree that that's a good thing, but we can officially decide that later. But yeah, let's turn to the presentation.
Okay, I will say before I start, my talking points, we did look up to your question of Medicaid. The ECEI did a workforce study recently of those surveyed. 11% of ECE educators are on Medicaid. 37% receive some public benefit, whether that be SNAP, TCA, TANF, CCS, or others. And 16% reported they have no health insurance at all, which is also a big concern.
Yeah, that's so.
So just FYI.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to start with a story. In 2023, we launched our work in community by listening and building relationships, prioritizing hearing from parents and early childhood educators. Increasingly from educators, we heard alarm, confusion, and asks for help around the new blueprint for Maryland's future and its pre-K expansion goals. They didn't know what it was, but they were worried it was going to put them out of business. We realized that the political and economic context that childcare providers were operating in was shifting, and in a big way, as a result of this landmark state legislation. But as often happens, changes that occur at the state level, it was very hard to clarify and understand how it would all work on the local level. The ECEI had commissioned a report to understand the implications in Montgomery County. The report estimated that there would need to be 6,683 seats in community-based childcare settings in order to meet the blueprint goals of a 50-50 mixed delivery system. In 2023, we had 207. So here's what we did. We brought on a consultant to conduct intentional research around center-based leaders and to understand their perceptions of pre-K expansion. And then once we hired our ECE manager, she completed the same study with family childcare. With an equity lens, it's important to understand the different barriers for important subpopulations. Through this research, we identified the biggest barrier to pre-K expansion in Montgomery County. First, awareness of the opportunity. More than a third of the leaders we contacted had never even heard about the Blue Pay pre-K expansion grants. Secondly, complexity of the administrative tasks with both Excels and the pre-K grant application. Third, the lack of qualified educators and the overall workforce shortage. And fourth, inadequate financial resources to cover the true cost of quality care. So then together with our partners, we began to co-create strategies to address each of these barriers. We partnered with MCPS and DHHS and various community associations to run outreach events. We contracted with local experts to help child care centers apply for and manage the pre-K grants, as well as to build capacity and prepare for the application. We spent $30,000 of private philanthropic funds in fiscal year 24. We then opened a competitive RFP for local groups to share their ideas on how to build capacity for family child care providers. We made 4 grants totaling $168,000, and those were funded by both HHS dollars as well as private philanthropy. We coordinated with MCPS around their gaps in outreach for pre-K and Head Start and funded both meals for their staff working overtime at registration events, as well as covered $15,000 gap to pay for bus ads that was reduced from their budget this year. Along the way, we engaged the stakeholders we were partnering with to solicit feedback and measure results. We used this to fuel our advocacy during state session, and we drafted recommendation memos to both local and state governments and spoke up during public hearings. To the leaders at the ECEI, we began to make several recommendations, some of which so far have been that child care providers need individualized capacity building technical assistance to be ready to apply for the state pre-K grant, that we should fund seats while they are going through capacity building in alignment with the precedent set by MSDE, and that providers will continue to need application and grant managed support even after they receive that state grant. Midway through these pilots in fiscal year 24, there were 354 pre-K seats in community-based settings, which translates into $1.9 million in new state money in our jurisdiction and our local early care and education system. Letitia Gasaway, owner and co-founder of Minds in Motion Childcare, who applied for board membership after receiving the application support through our pilot, said, "The Children's Opportunity Alliance has played a key role in helping us navigate the grant process, and their continued mission and efforts to support childcare facilities like ours are vital to expanding access. Thanks to their guidance and commitment, we were able to secure the necessary resources to provide more seats and extend our high-quality services to even more children. Their partnership has been instrumental in ensuring that programs like ours thrive and continue to impact the community." I first met Letitia at an Action in Montgomery event that was held, and that was how we connected with them. The formula that we used in this work involved a cycle of engagement from stakeholders, identifying goals and barriers through community engagement, data analysis, and research, co-creating strategic interventions with key stakeholders, piloting these interventions and seeking feedback and measuring results, crafting recommendations to sustain the success, advocate for change, and continuously seek feedback on how it works. Importantly, though, when listening to the community to identify the issues and co-creating strategies for change, we've been employing systems thinking. In the systems thinking journey for the Children's Opportunity Alliance, we are continuously developing our understanding of the early childhood system as a group of interacting, interrelated, interdependent parts that form a complex, unified whole. We know that all systems have a purpose and are comprised of structures incorporating feedback that inform the system's behavior. The economist W. Edward Deming is famous for his quote, "Every system is perfectly designed and structured to get the results that it does." Borrowing from the world of public health and the philosophy of social determinants of health, we think about strategic change in terms of upstream, midstream, and downstream. There are 3 ways to impact children who are part of our early care and education system. Downstream is through direct service to children, childcare, home visiting, and supporting children, direct interventions for children and families. In midstream, we are supporting the organizations and systems that are supporting children and families, promoting healthy behaviors that will eventually lead to downstream direct impact. At the population and community level impact, this is where the advocacy and broad social and economic change is targeted to have a more universal impact. As a new organization, we started at midstream and upstream levels, listening to educators, parents, and institutions in this space to understand what is working and where improvements are needed. An example of the midstream work is the capacity building, grant writing, and back office administrative support that was provided to community-based child care programs. And that led and provided us, it helped us build trust. It helped us to understand the nuance of what was happening and what support was needed, and to gather feedback from the community that then influenced our upstream work that led to a data dashboard, state and local advocacy work, and the completion of the fiscal map to better understand how much money we are investing in the ECE system. For example, we now can say, when you look at our county budget, early care and education spending is 2% of our total county budget. However, our 0 to 5 population is 7% of our county population. So, the new strategic systems change we've been working on within pre-K expansion is just one aspect of the common agenda. One of our activities within expanded ECE, access and affordability. This year, we're hoping to apply this same formula to improve family navigation by conducting research to understand parent and guardian choices, identify barriers to navigating programs and resources, and to begin to pilot interventions such as the Community Ambassadors Training Program. And we continue to develop ideas to address the workforce and financial barriers, which simply are much harder. There is a lot of work to be done, and there is no shortage of good ideas and opportunities to seize. The proposed amendments in Bill 2325 will severely limit our ability to pilot strategic interventions with vulnerable subpopulations in order to test, refine, and measure results in the interest of getting to the best possible recommendation that can then be scaled and sustained. We believe strongly that before we make a recommendation to our government partners regarding changing or expanding the services they are offering, we need to do our own thorough due diligence, collaborate with others, and go through the full cycle and make sure that our recommendations are sound. I want to take the opportunity to talk about the full breadth of our success over these past 3 years. Acknowledging that it takes substantial time and resources to even stand up a new 501c3, support a 21-member board in developing bylaws and committees, complete a strategic plan with our own mission, vision, and values, hire a team of 7, etc., and the list goes on. In addition, over the last 3 years, we've completed a common agenda for Montgomery County's early care and education system, conducted it through community engagement, data analysis, and research that was required in order for us to get there. We've launched advisory bodies and work groups to now move forward with the work of the common agenda. We've engaged diverse stakeholders and begun the process of building public awareness through communication efforts and events like Read Across America Week, and bringing in national author Dan Worry and sharing data analysis and other research with stakeholders. We've researched and learned from national best practices. We've met with other leaders from groups like First Steps Kent to understand how they use their dedicated funding stream to make grants in the community. We've begun the long game of driving advocacy and creating space for those most important and impacted by this issue to share their voices. We've submitted dozens of testimonies, met with elected officials both at the state and local level, stood up for children, young children, and the adults who care for them, and so much more. Lastly, last night we held an emergency board meeting to discuss these amendments as a full board. 12 out of 18 board members were in attendance. Nicole Rodriguez Hernandez, in her seat as council staff representative, abstained from offering opinions. As we talked through the original legislation, the language amendments proposed in Bill 2325 and the amendments offered by council members Luedke and Mink, we did not have clear consensus as a full board on a lot of our preferred language. We respectfully ask for more time to allow this board to continue conversations to achieve greater consensus on what we would like to propose as language amendments to the original legislation. That's it.
Thank you. Well, that's why we're not voting today. As I've said to you privately and publicly, I tend to try to do the same in both places, that we want you guys to work through that process and to get to the best solution where everyone's talking. I think you've heard today some people moving and being open to moving from positions that maybe you thought prior to today they weren't, so all around. So I think that's good. I'll turn to colleagues if there's thoughts or questions on any of this. First to Co-Chair Albanos.
This button is not working. So appreciate the presentation. It's consistent with the conversations we've been having, and we've all been trying to keep each other informed throughout all of this, and so I think it's really valuable. I do think that as we evolve and meet the needs of our community, we have to be nimble and open to adjustments to the original vision. No doubt about that, and that will always be the case. But we also have to think through the practicality and logistics of what exactly that means and create, whether it's through the board or whether it's through some other process, assurances that we are minimizing, and it's all hands on deck, right? I mean, duplication is, it depends on your perspective. Like, I get that. But what we obviously don't want to do is unintentionally repeat the efforts of others, and to stay consistent. And this is a problem in government, period, like just across the board. You name the agency, you name the effort, you name the subject, there's always a stovepipe issue, particularly here where we've got multiple folks coming to the table. But we also have to think through, as the model shifts and evolves and changes, the infrastructure of COA to be able to meet that change. You've got an incredibly dedicated staff who's working really hard, but it takes a lot of time and energy to be able to provide the types of services that you're already providing and that you'd like to do a little bit more of. And I get the argument for why you feel like you need to contribute to that system building, but there's still that system building. And I, having been on all sides of grants, takes a lot of time and energy, and we're going to get to that conversation later. And part of me worries that you're going to get so bogged down into, those conversations and in that work that it will take away from your ability to be able to make the level of policy recommendations and bring the right stakeholders together to be able to make them that we envisioned in the first place. And that really followed MMF's model, like what they did to get to the recommendation that, preceded COA. That is the model. They did an amazing job of convening stakeholders and brought people to the table that were not even aware that the table existed. So, and that's like the kind of thing we want to do more of, and I just don't want to lose sight of that. So as you all continue to have these internal conversations, as this evolution happens, we do it in a way that's reasonable and structured and thoughtful. But also takes those things into account, that we don't want to lose our what the ultimate prize is here, which is making significant adjustments to a system that's already pretty complicated. So that's just a thought that was ringing through my head as you're going through this, Ms. Rustick. The other thought is, one of the areas that COA has, and all of us need to do more of, is the private sector. making sure that that was the new in all of this that I found to be the most exciting, because nonprofit and government, we partner all the time, we work together, but making sure that we go back to that initial vision to bring those stakeholders to the table, I think needs to be part of this more formally than organic. And so moving forward, I think that's got to be something that we all have to be deliberate about. Just like, we're not going to build more housing without developers and builders in Montgomery County. We're not going to be able to meet the needs of our community unless businesses and private providers start contributing more of their finances or making more space available. They got to be part of this. And so that was just another thing that I wanted to make sure is discussed, not necessarily right now, but that we don't lose sight of. So rambled a little bit there, but wanted to get those thoughts out.
I appreciate that. And as you know, I had to push against my normal way we start a meeting on this topic, which I let go today, but you know what I'm going to say. We start with the need of how many kids are covered and how many are not, and you've referred to it several times, and where we're trying to get to. So I appreciate you baking that into your comments. And I'll just say one other thing on the systems building side, and it's something I always say. I want to get to the point where we talk about scale and dedicated funding. And I see you all playing a huge role, and I know you see yourself playing a huge role in helping make that recommendation. And to Councilor Albernaz's point, I know you can walk and chew gum, but I just want to make sure we're getting there too. Go ahead.
So we had our first meeting of that work group yesterday. So that work is starting, and we have been doing that research. We've been partnering with Children's Funding Project to do that research and work. So we are walking and chewing gum. And I think the grant making in that work has honestly been less than 5 to 10% of the work that we've done over the last years. But however, in this process, it's getting lifted up and being shown as the majority of what we've done. And I wouldn't say that's necessarily the case. We do have a business advisory group. They do meet regularly. We are doing what we can to engage business. But I think business has struggled with some of the dynamics of the board conversations, and they are very concerned about a dedicated funding stream. And we have not had the same business buy-in that you've seen at the national level from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in saying this is an economic imperative. They understand that, but it's been a bit more work for us to get business partners to see this as a top priority, considering a lot of other things that are happening right now in the community.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the chamber has made the case pretty clear. I think the evidence is overwhelming that if you provide high quality childcare at an affordable price for people, that it's going to help all aspects of the economy and people's lives. So, but that aside, Councilmember Mink, and then if other colleagues, Councilmember Mink.
Thank you, Vice President Joanna. Yeah, I mean, what I like about the COA model here is that it's systems building while also doing the thing by being able to use dollars to pilot methods of filling in gaps, expanding engagement and outreach to inform the public about the work that's available and that's being done by others as well, that we are benefiting private practices, we are benefiting families and parents. They are benefiting from that work being done, as well as we're getting data points back about what actually works so that we can make better decisions about larger funding, budgetary choices. If there is one thing that we definitely need in this space, it's to find ways to do more faster. I think that's the primary message that we get from the public is like, we want to see more of this work done faster. So while we as a body in our work, right, we care about the big picture and about having 5 years from now a system that's really going full steam ahead, that's working really well. We're looking further down the road. The public is telling us we need more of our kids in these seats. We need more of these seats available to kids tomorrow, today, like yesterday, like 2 years ago. So we want more of this progress happening faster. And so the agility of COA to be able to actually make that happen right now today through a process that is also systems building, because they're piloting models that we can expand, I think that is the reason that we heard such an overwhelming outpouring of support for the work that they are doing at the public hearing. We heard folks speaking to both of those aspects, the benefits to individual practices and to families, and the benefits that gives us as we learn how we can improve our system moving forward. Completely agree with Chair Albernaz's point about the importance here of prioritizing those voices in the business sector, especially as we look at, what the blueprint calls for. We have to make sure that we are elevating those voices in this space, and that kind of prioritization is a shift in the early childhood space in the county and in the state that the blueprint has really ushered in and amplified. And but I think it's a really good one, and this provides us a space to do that. And I think, again, what we're hearing is that although the grants and the funding, that is a relatively small proportion of the work that COA is doing, is that it's really having an outsized beneficial impact on being able to do this work, being able to pilot activities. And I just want to make sure that I think it's really important. Obviously, we can see through our discussion here alone, not even withstanding the many other sessions that we've had about this over the last couple of years, that clearly work is needed to be done here to clean up this whole space and to make sure that everybody knows what the expectations are and all of that. But what I want to make sure that we keep as our number one priority is what we are hearing from the public, which is that we need more of this work to be done faster now. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Sales.
Thank you. Just a few questions about the makeup of this body and the responsibilities that you've prioritized, and the changes that will come with this legislation. I know that prohibiting COA from issuing grants to ECE providers may hinder their fundraising efforts. Under this bill, would COA be allowed to?
Ms. Councilman says we're going to do that, and we're heading to that. Yeah, that's the next item. So do you want to wait until we? Okay. Yeah, because I think we'll all have questions on that. Do you have something right now? Yeah. Okay.
I just wanted to say I fully and wholeheartedly concur with the need to do it better, faster, right? That is what we are all hearing. It's what all our offices hear. And also, as we transition into the next item on the agenda, respecting that policy changes at the state will happen, can happen, adjustments may be made. We need to be cognizant of not restraining or confining things so much that every time every time a new thing comes up, we have to come back and change the statutes, right? We do need to make sure we're looking at this in a totality with some measure of agility to meet the needs that will be always shifting, always changing in this space. So I want to say that just because it is really critical to this, and it is, as we say, an all hands on deck kind of moment that we must work with, and that we do need to do a better job about not unduly restricting or being too vague. See, there's two sides of that coin. But in terms of landing in the right best spot in order to help the coordinating entity do what it needs to do, also respecting that it still has a private philanthropic side to it, and to make sure that we are doing our best to support the county's work in this space as well. So with that, next item.
Absolutely agree. There's always the fierce urgency of now. We feel it, but we want to plan for the system as well. And I know we're doing both. So turn back to Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez.
All right, and to wrap us up in the designation conversation, did want to note that there is some requirements around reporting that COA does meet, and those reports are all linked here in the staff report on the top of page 11 for you as well. And when it comes to finances, One of the duties that the coordinating entity is required to do is secure and administer private sector funding to support the early care education system and manage and administer public funding that is directly appropriated to the entity. And so the entity currently receives county funding through the Children's Opportunity Alliance non-departmental account, which requires coordination with the Office of Management and Budget and DHHS as the contract manager. So you'll see on the table 6 on page 11 in the middle, just highlighting over the past few fiscal years since the COA's existence as the entity, the revenue sources, with the county funding through the NDA serving as the majority of their funding, with also the addition of the private dollars that they've been able to raise, and funding from our partners at MCPS as well. I've noted key spending categories, and they've also provided a more detailed table on circle page 33 of what their spending has focused on, such as the contracts, a lot of it related to the technical assistance of blueprint, application support, research, the common agenda, communications, the equity coaches, fundraising support, and general consultants, as well as funding on grants. And circle page 38 highlights specifically what those grants are that Ms. Resnick has been discussing, and the pre-K expansion contracts related to the $1 million the council shifted to last fiscal year. That's on circle page 29. As the contract monitor, DHHS has also provided how they are meeting that the entity is meeting their activities and contractual requirements, and that is available on circle page 32 as well. It's a less detailed, but provides specifically related to the legislation, how the activities tied to each. And so just noting for the context of the conversation as well, not only with the board makeup and the stakeholders involved in the early care and education system, that the executive branch coordinates, and specifically Office of Management and Budget, with COA on developing the recommendation that is presented to the county executive and then transmitted over to the county council. So typical of how it's normally done as well with departments. And DHHS is the contract monitor. So that fiscal management, they state, is a core component of the contract between HHS and COA, ensuring that all funds are spent in accordance with county policies and contractual requirements, and due to that fiscal and contractual oversight between HHS and COA. So just noting that for your information as well. And of course, we've had a lot of detailed budget conversations this year and prior. So as we come to a close on the designation conversation, there are a few options for the committee's consideration. In addition to the OLO, or Office of Legislative Report on the evaluation of the framework and metrics for assessing the designees, the committee can, and I understand there won't be a vote today, but they have 3 main options. The first is to redesignate the Children's Opportunity Alliance as the coordinating entity for the second official 3-year period. The second is to maintain and or extend COA's temporary designation, which has been is in process through December 31st, 2025, to allow for the legislative action or for other purposes as determined by the committee and council. And then the third is to designate a new nonprofit as the coordinating entity. We'll note that this may require revisions to the county code and or council and executive support in establishing that new nonprofit, as it was done so originally when the council and county executive help supported the Children's Opportunity Fund, to then change in transition to the Children's Opportunity Alliance to serve in that role. And that's specifically related around back in 2022 when the committee was first discussing the entity. With the board makeup requirements, it would be hard to enter a typical RFP proposal to consider different nonprofit entities for this role. And that concludes the staff report.
I appreciate that, and I think based on the conversation we've had, it's pretty clear we're not picking a new entity, but we will discuss all of that when we come back and take the votes. But all this has been really helpful. It's great to hear that you have been continued to be compliant with all the other requirements under the law, and really the discussion here today has hovered around how have you evolved, what should we be doing right now, what's the right structure and form. Less about whether you're the right folks for it. I'll speak for myself, but I think you've heard that from many of us. So let's move into the bill conversation. Ms. Wellens.
Great.
And just a time check, it is 11:45. We will stop at 12:30 no matter where we are, and continue next time. But I think it's good. We've been discussing a lot of that stuff, a lot of the things contained in the bill already. So I think hopefully that'll help the conversation. Go ahead, Ms. Wellens.
Yes. So item number 3, expedited bill 23-25, early care and education coordinating entity. And as the council vice president stated, that some of these topics have already been discussed in part, but to give you just a brief overview for the millions watching at home, as Council Vice President
On your
likes to say.
birthday, it means a lot to me that you would say that. Thank you.
On page 2 of the staff memorandum, you see the bill specifics. Really, the concept was to kind of focus on the specific language of the entity's duties and bring some clarity to that and make the language a bit more concise and focusing on the coordinating role of the entity. And then in addition, kind of on the flip side of that, the legislation was focused on addressing the big issue that I think has been a recurrent issue of the ambiguity of the term direct services under the original legislation. As you know, the original legislation prevents the entity from doing quote unquote direct services. And that terminology has really been somewhat in the eye of the beholder. It's very challenging to carry out in practice, as we've seen. So the idea was to kind of unpack that a bit more to say specifically what are those direct services that, as the coordinating entity, the entity should not necessarily be focused on. And all of those are obviously subject to discussion and your potential amendments. But so originally, the bill, as drafted, would clarify that the entity doesn't provide early care and education, doesn't award or fund grants, doesn't enter into contracts with early care and education providers, doesn't provide goods or services to the providers, and doesn't fund early care and education seats or the provision of early care and education to individuals. And again, part of that intent was to avoid the duplication of services as well, which I know is another complex discussion that the committee's already engaged in some today. I want to note regarding the staff packet, there is a summary of public testimony on page 3. Also, some of the public testimony appears in the packet. And sorry, I was just going to check that's at circle 26. Unfortunately, all of the public testimony did not make its way into my packet because it was not posted on the council website inadvertently. So that has been corrected. All of the public testimony is now on the website, and I'll do an addendum to include that additional testimony, but just wanted to note that for the committee. It's not all in here. Going into the issues that were identified for the committee's consideration, and we're on page 4 of the staff packet. The first item noted simply kind of re-emphasizes the original purposes, as Chair Albornoz had stated earlier, and as we learned through the presentation during item number 2, a big genesis of the entity was the Montgomery Moving Forward, MMF, recommendations about the creation of the entity. So I won't restate those. They have been discussed, but I will pause there, Mr. Vice President, in case you want any discussion on this item.
On the purpose.
Right. The purpose of the entity as a neutral convener and
Yes.
coordinating body.
Yeah, why don't we pause there? And I will, because Councilmember Sales had started down the path here, I want to turn to her first, and then we'll come back and start over. Councilmember
Thank
Sales.
you, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Wellens. Back to my question about this bill and what would change. Would COA be able to transfer funds to a third-party organization to issue grants?
Right. The bill would not prevent that.
Oh, okay. Okay. And how much of COA's time and organizational capacity is spent on providing grants to ECE providers?
So we don't provide grants to ECE providers. Grants are typically given more to nonprofits. The relationships or through this last year of having the $1 million, we had contracts with some different early care and education providers to fund seats and support capacity building. We've only done that this past year. Grants started in our first year, and then last year then the second year we only had the $130,000 to MSCCA and Family Child Care Alliance of Maryland for the back office and grant writing support, and then into this year we only had the grants for the community-based programs who were supporting the expansion of family child care. So it is typically, depending on the fiscal year and our total budget, anywhere from 2 to, I think what I put in the packet, 8% or 10% of our time or budget. And I think what I will also say on the grants piece, and I was reminded of this as I was reading through the packet, the example that MMF used and talked about a lot was First Steps Kent. And First Steps Kent has millage that is, I think, an 8 or 9 million millage that comes from the county, goes through First Steps Kent, and then First Steps Kent, as the coordinating entity, is providing grants. They bring in community members, parents as well, train them on how to review the grants and make decisions about the grants with the equity principles of understanding that the people who are closer to the ground have a better understanding of where the gaps and needs are in the community. And so MMF put forward in their response to this that it does make sense to have grant making be a part of the portfolio. And whether it's a combination of private philanthropic dollars or county dollars. But I will note also the first year that we did give grants in, what was that, fiscal year 23, we used MCPS and private philanthropy to do it. Last year, the second year it was private philanthropy, and then this year it was HHS. So depending on the year, how we have funded the grants and the source funding of the grants has shifted based on our budget and what is allowable.
So are these grants providing direct service, or is it related to the systems building work?
So I see Children's Opportunity Alliance's role as being an intermediary. And so if we are providing a grant to an organization, they are the ones who are providing the direct service, not us. We are the pass-through entity. So that if we provide a grant to the Food Council to support outreach for SNAP for children 0 to 5, the Food Council is the one who's actually supporting their staff using our pass-through dollars to do that work. So I do not consider that direct service. I do consider the grant, for example, that we gave to Food Council as systems building, because part of what we knew or understand is that there are not as many families applying for SNAP or WIC who qualify. And so that is a systems level change, because what we also believe and understand and know from the research is more families who are applying for SNAP or WIC will then more likely apply for child care subsidy at the state or working parents assistance or other supports that they might qualify for. So it's important to have families opt into those other different funding sources to support their families' needs, and then hopefully connect them to other supports as well.
Okay, and then how do you decide when and where to provide services? Do you coordinate with HHS to assess community needs? Are you engaging with stakeholder organizations during both the planning and delivery?
We do our best throughout the process to engage with a wide variety of stakeholders, MCPS, HHS, as well as parents and community-based providers, as well as other nonprofit partners and stakeholders. So for example, through our common agenda process, we had a handful of different stakeholders, and we had a group of about 20 people who were helping us do that work, and held various different listening sessions or community conversations to gather feedback from a broader set of stakeholders. And so then as we go to implement any kind of strategic work, we do try to continue, and is demonstrated today as we talked about the Community Ambassador Program. It is often, we do our best to keep everybody informed as things are moving forward. But oftentimes that is challenging because there are a lot of stakeholders to keep connected to the work.
Okay, that's all I have for now. Thank you.
No, thank you. All really good baseline questions. All right, so let's dig into, let's start with the way the packet is organized here, the neutral convener question. There's an amendment related to that too, but is that we're going to talk about the neutral convener point?
Yes, but I apologize, but I need to make a clarification or correction to my response to Councilmember Sales. And I apologize because I didn't think through your question adequately when you first, and I answered too quickly. So your question regarding whether under the legislation as written, the entity could give money basically to a third party to then administer grants, and the answer is no.
Oh, okay.
Because the way that it's written is that, they would not be able to award or fund grants. So, just using a third party to award the grants. So if that is a capacity that you want and the committee want the entity to have, we would need to amend the language there. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
All right, so the bill as introduced defines ECE as a quote-unquote neutral convener, which is going back to the original MMF recommendations. Obviously, I think any convener I would hope would be neutral, but not always. And so I think that was, so let's talk. I know that one of the amendments, and I would ask council members Mink and Lukey to speak to this if they would like, which I'm sure they would, was to strike the word neutral. Let's just talk about the concept. I mean, I feel like it's embedded. I feel like you see yourself as that, but I would like to ask both sides, all the partners here, if we agree with that. I personally.
Or do you want me to kind of explain?
Why don't we? Okay, I see Councilmember Mink has her hand up. I'll do Councilmember Lukey because she asked first, and then Councilmember Mink, and then I'll turn. You can think more about the question. Councilmember Lukey.
Yep. So I certainly appreciate why the word neutral was put in there, but then here was my hiccup. And maybe it doesn't need to be removed. Maybe it does, but that's the thought for consideration, right? Is if recommendations are going to be made, which is a task that the ECE is required to do, the recommendations may not be perceived as neutral or may in fact be critical of something that has not gotten done quickly enough or what have you. And I don't want there to be any sort of, they have to be able to give their recommendations freely in that way. And so to the extent that the word neutral stays in, just wanted to be clear, the recommendations are the recommendations, and they need not be, somebody can't say, no, you can't put that there because it's not neutral, or someone's subjective feeling of neutrality. It should be objectively evaluative based on what is going on, of course, but that was the concern that I had, and then Councilmember Mink had, and that's why we flagged the word neutral as a discussion point as to whether or not to remove it. But certainly what I've done right now is try to express legislative intent to say, hey, yes, you still can give your recommendations. They should be objective and based on the other statutory duties that the coordinating entity has.
I would agree with that. Councilmember Mink?
I think we might all be in agreement here. Yeah, I mean, the concern was, I mean, I understand it was in the original legislation, et cetera. And so, and there's not like a legislative definition of neutral. So if there's not, so maybe it's fine. My concern, as Councilmember Lukey noted, is that, the body exists to part of the purpose is for them to have a perspective and to be finding ways for us to achieve goals, to be coming up with ideas. All of the people who are at the table are there because they bring perspectives and expertise and information and feedback. So they come with opinions, and that's the value of the body, opinions that are based on their knowledge and expertise and experiences. And that is the value of the body. And so then COA as a body comes out with recommendations, they pilot things, et cetera. And so if doing all of that, if all of that being true still falls under what we would call a neutral convener, maybe that just means like neutral in the convening process, then I'm fine. Then I'm fine with the language. I just want to make sure that everybody who's participating understands that we want the body to have a perspective, to be making recommendations, and for them to be advocating for those things, and for them to be piloting those things. Everything that we've talked about, like, we certainly don't want there to be putting in any language that's going to hamper that. But again, if everybody feels like that falls still under neutral convener, then I'm comfortable with that. But interested to hear from other folks as well.
Councilman Robin.
Yeah, so I appreciate the point. And you're right. The intent was never that we restrict COA from taking a formal position on a policy matter. The word neutral was truly meant to be the convener of public-private nonprofit, kind of like a time and space for the various stakeholders and sectors, including members of the community, to be able to come together and help inform those policy recommendations that they will then make, but not to inhibit them making those policy recommendations. So if we need to clarify that in some way to affirm that intent, super supportive of that, but that's why neutral was in there.
Yeah, and I think we're all saying the same thing. I can assumed it was neutral in the process of bringing everyone together in a fair way, like not convening and trying to stack the deck, but obviously you push forward with what you think you should do, and you've been doing that. So you guys actually didn't comment on this really in the testimony. You commented on a lot, but this was not one of the things COA commented on. So
no, and we did talk about it last night at the board meeting. And what we did at the board meeting was, for every amendment we talked about, we discussed it, and then we had all members of the board put up a red, yellow, or green card. And
you
so
neutrally convened.
Well, so what we tried to do was to talk about some of these different sticking points and have people then say, okay, we are okay with having neutral there, or we are not okay with having neutral there. And what I think one of the questions that came up was, what does neutral mean? And I think we raised some of the same questions brought up here today, is if the recommendation, all of this needs to be centered around children and families in our community and making sure we are doing what is best for them. And so as we are putting forward policy recommendations, that is our lens of how we are looking at the work. And so where we actually landed was 3 wanted neutral and 8 did not. But I think there were more questions about what exactly does it mean to be a neutral convener. And Lori raised a brilliant point last night, is a lot of this has to do with how things are actually implemented, right? We can work to try to get the specific perfect wording in there, but a lot is going to rely on actual implementation. And so I think if we're all in agreement that it's important for us to put forward recommendations, and that those recommendations need to be centered around what is best for our children and families in our community. And I think that's what we're coming to, and that we're hearing from all these different perspectives, then I think there is agreement.
Great. Well, I think you're hearing that from most people, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, we totally agree. We welcome the accountability partner to tell us that something is working or isn't working or could be working better. So I would agree the neutral is the convening, not necessarily the neutrality and giving recommendations back.
So we're not deciding today finally, but if there's some language that you all want to think about that emphasizes both roles in that way and come back, that's great. Or we can leave it as is and just understand. I think I'm hearing pretty much the same thing from everybody on that. So I did want to allow Ms. Scarabay, to just make comments in general. I think you have some things you want to share from Jennifer and yourself on the bill itself.
Right. So I know we've talked a lot about Jennifer. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here, but she did leave some comments that I will read. They're fairly long. I'll try to get through them quickly, but I do want to read them in her absence. So this is submitted on behalf of Jennifer Arnaiz, our Senior Administrator for Early Childhood Services within the Department of Health and Human Services. So she goes on to say, "Good afternoon, council members. Thank you for allowing my words to be shared in my absence and for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Department of Health and Human Services about the role and responsibility of the Early Care and Education Coordinating Entity. While our department's detailed input has been provided through the interdepartmental memo and will be expanded upon during today's and next working sessions, I want to take a moment to express our clear agreement with the intent and direction of the proposed amendment. DHHS views these refinements as both necessary and essential to strengthening the role of the Early Care and Education Coordinating Entity. We also view and recognize this role as a needed accountability partner that plays an essential role in ensuring transparency, alignment, and community voice in this space. When the Early Care and Education Coordinating Entity was created, the vision for a collaborative partner leading system change, which means transforming how a system operates to achieve better outcomes. The legislation aimed to address gaps in our early childhood system through improved collaboration and strategic planning. However, it left questions about the entity's scope and functions unresolved. The Council's proposed amendments clarify the coordinating entity's mission by focusing on strategic building, systems coordinating, and cross-sector collaboration. This legislation was never intended to create another service provider, but to establish a body that could drive coordination, effectiveness, and accountability within the early childhood system. We support a coordinating entity that researches innovative change models for the entire early care and education system, focusing on policy-driven impacts on public service delivery while complementing community-based organizations' work. As federal support diminishes due to recent budget cuts, our local early childhood system faces challenges in access, affordability, and workforce stability. In this changing landscape, it is crucial to protect vulnerable children and families and prioritize educators. A clearly defined and strategically focused coordinating entity is essential to ensure local investments and initiatives are equitable, intentional, and aligned to fill gaps left by reduced federal resources. The entity must also serve as a key accountability partner to ensure the county works toward agreed-upon outcomes that benefit children, families, and educators, ensuring progress is measurable, transparent, and sustained over time. We feel it is important to acknowledge that in its first 3 years, the coordinating entity has increasingly concentrated its efforts on programmatic level work. While well-intentioned, this focus has diverted attention from the broader and more pressing need for system-level analysis and structural change. Under the term innovation, the entity has initiated various projects in a more reactive manner. While these efforts are commendable, there lack the opportunity to coordinate and adopt a more strategic approach that includes components for expansion and sustainability. While providers appreciate these temporary infusions of dollars, the work for larger level systems change is lost. This shift highlights the importance of ensuring that legislation clearly articulates the entity's strategic role and aligns expectations to prioritize advocacy and outreach, policy guidance, and systems-level transformation rather than individual-level program implementation. We want to underscore that as a publicly funded entity established through county legislation, the coordinating entity should operate with transparency, accountability, and neutrality to maintain public trust. Its unique value lies in serving as a neutral convener and systems leader, not as a direct service provider or financial competitor. The proposed amendments rightly prohibit service delivery, grant awarding, contracting with childcare providers, and funding ECE seats, safeguarding the entity's focus and credibility. At the same time, it's important to clarify that the contract permits the use of contractors for research, stakeholder engagement, and other system-level functions central to its role to remain data-informed. To build on this strong foundation, we encourage the inclusion of clear accountability measures in the legislation. These measures should include specific metrics such as progress on strategic priorities, which tracks the completion of key initiatives and milestones outlined in the strategic plan, stakeholder engagement, measured by the level of participation and satisfaction among stakeholders through surveys and feedback mechanisms, equity outcomes assessed by improvements in access to early childhood services for underserved communities through demographic data and service utilization rates, and cross-sector coordination effectiveness evaluated by tracking joint initiatives, shared resources, and integrated service delivery. These measures will be crucial for providing clear direction and accountability for system change. Assessing the entity's impact means it meets its current legislative mandate and supports its ability to evolve in response to the county's changing needs and priorities. In closing, we look forward to the coordinating entity making true systems change with meaningful impacts over the next years. DHHS fully supports the broader legislative effort to enable a unified strategic approach to early childhood systems building. We support a successful coordinating entity that can lead meaningful change, and these amendments are essential to restoring focus, clarifying purpose, and ensuring an entity can fulfill its role as a neutral, accountable systems leader. This is a pivotal moment that demands bold leadership, shared responsibility, and relentless commitment to measurable, lasting change for Montgomery County's youngest. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for the words. That was comprehensive, and I think will lead very nicely into the direct services conversation where we can dig into some of the, I think, main points of disagreement here. So let's start with that one. We'll see how far we get. But I do think it's kind of emblematic of the whole conversation. I think we feel the neutral convener point aside, I think we've handled that for now, and you'll come back with language potentially. Is that can you all work together on that? Okay. All right. So is it Miss Wellens? Are you moving us on? Okay.
Right. So item number 2, as was mentioned previously, there is arguably ambiguity about the term direct services. And so by indicating that the entity may not provide direct services, there has been some confusion and challenge over defining actually what that means. The bill had laid out specific functions that the entity would not be permitted to do in an effort to bring more clarity to the role. In that regard, I wanted to bring the committee's attention as well to issue number 5 actually would be a potential amendment by the council members Lukey and Mink concerning this issue of kind of unpacking, okay, let's look at these 5 specific things that the bill says the entity doesn't do and kind of review each of those and potentially refine them. So that, again, the pages 7 and 8 is a potential amendment for your consideration that I would defer to the council members if they want to discuss it at this time.
Yeah, why don't we generally discuss just the issue of direct
concept.
services and we can, because I think we can back our way into the amendment. So I guess let me start with just, since you just spoke, just to follow up on Ms. Anais's comments. I heard some reactive, not focusing on systems. We saw in the presentation an example from Ms. Resnick of how they connect the grant-making function, for example, to, in their view, systems-based work. Could you just offer why, let's just get into why you don't, assuming you don't, think that is connected to systems-based work if they're addressing a gap or providing technical assistance. Actually, let me be even more specific. In the next item, the duplication, because I think this is an example too. One of the things that they've done is provide technical assistance to providers seeking another acronym, MSDE grants, correct? Right? You all do that too, right? In some form or fashion?
I would say when we started doing it in 2023, they did not yet have a blueprint coordinator on board, and that was work that was not yet being done by HHS.
Okay. Well, I'm just trying to give an example, and you can give other examples of just why providing service in that way is either duplicative or not in a coordination role, if that's your view.
I think I would like to answer that.
Thank you. Yes.
Michelle
I got you.
Galopoli, Planning Specialist with HHS. I think it goes back just to definition. We both have a different definition for direct service. So HHS is a direct service provider. We contract out, we grant out funding, and we also provide direct service. So therein lies a pivotal difference, I believe, with COA believes that they don't provide direct service because they have a grant or a contract with someone. But we serve, HHS serves through those grants, contracts, we serve providers. We serve who ultimately then assist with helping children. So COA says they define it that they're not directly working with children or providing direct services. I think that's just where the issue lies to start the conversation.
Right. Well, and I agree with you. I think I'm so glad you said that. When I say as a council member who is elected to represent folks in Montgomery County and allocates budget, if we allocate funding to someone and they do the service, we're doing it. I mean, that's how I feel too. So I understand why COA might say, okay, we're not directly doing it because they think it's important and not directly defined under the law. I think what we need to get to is, I agree with your take that is providing direct service under the traditional model, like, because we provide funding to whoever to do something. the question is, should or should not they do that? And that's the deeper level question I'm trying to get to. And if so, why or why not? You heard a presentation, I think, and you can certainly elaborate in a second about why you think you should. And I want to hear why we think that's not, or if that's your view, why you think that's not a good thing to do.
I think grant making, going into contracts with COA, I believe, it's my opinion, I believe that they will, of course I just lost my train of thought. I believe that there are other mechanisms in the county already set up for grant making, and others, we have an Office of Grants Management that does those kinds of things. I believe if they're creating grants or contracts for systems level work as recommended by MMF initially, I think that's great. But getting down on that service level that HHS does, I do believe it creates confusion.
So the piloted model, because what we've heard today is like we want to pilot something, see if it works, and then that could help disrupt. I'm just using words that have been used before. That you don't see that as a function or role of or helpful.
No, I personally do not. I feel a lot of effort goes into ensuring that who they're serving, we're not overlapping. A lot of time we have lots of emails going back, lots of conversations. Who are you serving? How are you serving them? It's very, very tedious and time consuming for HHS to review that. And so I believe we ultimately came to agreement on who they're serving through these and trying not to duplicate, but it is a lot of effort. And I do believe it creates confusion in the provider community.
Ms. Resnick? Do you have a response to that? And then I'll turn to colleagues.
So
that's a point of view that I think, I just would love to hear your response.
I think there are many different perspectives on this. And I think, part of what we've heard and what you guys heard through many of the public testimonies and even what I said earlier today, I think sometimes there is a disconnect between what HHS talks about that it's doing and versus what the community feels like it's getting or seeing. And so I also harken back to what was said here today of, we need to do more faster. And so if we need to do more faster, if we're only relying on our public systems to be able to do that and they are not as nimble as we could be, will that help us get to the end result that we want to get to as quickly as possible? And so that's where I think allowing us to be nimble, allowing us to figure out how to pilot, how to test and push our system to act and do things differently is important. And I think, talking to the different family child care, community-based organizations who helped expand awareness related to family child care, many of those family child care providers said to us, we didn't even know Blueprint was here and a thing, right? And so by providing grants to associations and partners in the community who are closer to more of those different family child care providers in our community who might not honestly be interacting with child care support services right now at all, right? When we went to a session that the Family Child Care Alliance of Maryland held, one of the first questions they asked, and they were holding it at HHS headquarters, was how many of you have used child care support services in the last year? And only about half of the people who were there raised their hand and said yes. So we know this system is larger and bigger than what HHS is able to touch and support and move. So I think we need to be able to be nimble to figure out how do we get to that total population out there and raise awareness and help provide that capacity and support, because that's what's going to get us to the outcomes. And I think where I lean more into is how do we get to those outcomes and how do we question and push the system and focus less on roles and what or how we could be doing that, because I think that limits us in being able to achieve the long-term goals we're trying to get to.
I appreciate that. I'll put myself back in the queue. Councilmember Albanese.
There we go. So lots to unpack. Again, more context because it's all relevant. So the Children's Opportunity Fund, which was the genesis of the Children's Opportunity Alliance, started after a meeting that Uma Oluwalia and Sally Rudney and I were in together, which was during the height of the recession when county government had to be shrunk so dramatically, and we were not able to meet the growing needs that were happening at the time. And so it was Sally who came to us and said, you know, I have this idea, and of course Sally had established the Montgomery County Community Foundation and had all of these amazing contacts, and there were all these people wanting to help, and so she helped organize us, got Uma and I together, pitched it to Ike, and Children's Opportunity Fund got off the ground, doing amazing work, leveraging county resources with private philanthropy and private resources. You know, the 15 cents that the county could invest ended up becoming $1 when you added it to all of these other funds. So that was like the genesis of COA. During the transition, as COF turned to COA, there were still obligations that they had and commitments that they had made, but that was like within the DNA of the organizations. And so I think that background and context is important because I totally get where you're coming from. Like being out in the community, meeting with providers in that capacity, having a little bit of that leverage actually, you know, you can make the argument, puts you in a better position to then help inform systems changes. Like I get that. I also very much appreciate HHS's point, which is, you know, the amount of contracts that they have to manage is completely overwhelming and that they're having a hard time managing on a good day. And the council in this body, this particular council, especially under Councilmember Kate Stewart's leadership as chair of government operations, has been working very hard to consolidate and make it easier for our nonprofit organizations to understand where to identify resources for them. So like all those things are kind of converging at the same time here as we're having the grants conversation. So the starting point in the legislation was making it crystal clear that that not be a function, but you're making a credible argument that it needs to be at least considered. But if it is going to be considered, then we have not thought through enough the guardrails and to make sure that we are not just creating another mechanism for a nonprofit who has a great idea. You know, I get the no wrong door, but we also have to be careful with that because it's just, you know, we just have to be careful with that because resources are going to become even more precious over the next 2 years in particular. And we don't want to just turn COA, as amazing as it is, into, you know, another wonderful provider that's out there that's doing great work, filling holes, but unintentionally investing a lot of their time and energy in filling those holes and not looking at the big picture. You're making the argument you can do both, and you need to do this to be able to do the other. I get it. So what I would like to do, and we're not going to resolve this in the next 6 minutes, but I would like to think through and actually have council staff. Now, you've already done some of this, but I go back to this because it's, you know, my best frame of reference. Collaboration Council does provide grants, does contract with county funds, but there are very clear parameters in place and checks and balances as they do that. And I'm not sure that I don't believe those are in place currently, you know, as constructed within the legislation. And if the will of the body is to go down that road in the evolution of COA, then they need to be. Because I think that will help alleviate at least, you know, many of my concerns. And last couple of points on this for now are, I think that, you know, when Jennifer here is going to be really helpful because it's great to read her testimony, but I'm sure she would love to elaborate on it. And I think we can pick this up kind of where we're leaving it off right now, but that's just one component, is this grants component, doing a little bit more research because I think, you know, that's important. And the last thing for now is this notion of direct service and what it means. You know, we had very interesting testimony from folks who are in this field who feel like it's not as conflicted as maybe HHS feels that it is. I get that. But if we are going to go down this road, we do have to better define. Obviously, that's why we're here. But those are my thoughts for now.
Absolutely. Councilmember Lukey.
Yeah, a couple of things, because as Councilmember Albornoz noted, the Collaboration Council does give out grants. It's not clear to me that the parameters around their grant making are in their statute or in anything that created the Collaboration Council, right? And so, like, typically that kind of stuff is in your notice of funding availability, not in legislation. So I think that would be something helpful for staff to unpack when we come back to talk about this further. And also with respect to the direct services phrase, I think, it's always been my understanding that the words that are used in a piece of legislation are to be given their ordinary and plain meaning. That's how the courts interpret that and do their legislative statutory interpretation in judicial opinions. And that is, in fact, how we should draft legislation as well. So if direct services has a special and or nuanced meaning other than providing childcare, because that seems to be what you are arguing is your interpretation of it internally in the agency, we need to have a discussion about that, because direct services to me means providing early childhood education, the actual providing of the education service. So I think that's something that if we do need to maintain that phrase and it has a special meaning other than what is ordinarily given to those words, we got to do better. I also, has anyone spoken to other groups about how that phrase has been applied or how it is utilized? Any national organizations, anything like that?
So we went to our consultants who helped us with the common agenda and who work with a lot of different collective impact initiatives. And I'm not remembering off the top of my head what their definitions were, but I could share them with you.
Okay, or if you could get them to our council staff, that would be great, because I think that's helpful in terms of everyone understanding the legislative choices that are being made or will be made moving forward and how to define things for greater clarity. We may all not be here at some point, and somebody else has to be able to pick this up and discern what it actually means. And it should be, again, it's plain and ordinary meaning. Otherwise, you better specify it as something else. I think that's it for now. It is 12:28, so I'll turn it back to our chair.
Councilman Mink had a comment, so we're going to give you the last 120 seconds.
Oh, plenty. In regards to direct services, yeah, I agree with what's been said about this. I think plain language is appropriate. I think that a very good case, as Chair Albornoz has said, has been presented today about the usefulness of the work that is happening with the funding, with the grant making, and I think certainly we do not want to funding is drying up in this space, and so we want to make sure that if there are philanthropic dollars out there, that we are encouraging them to move into this space. I am not personally worried about grant making being too much, taking up too much capacity, because we have heard that that's less than 10% of what COA is doing, alongside the very compelling points that the grant making that they are doing is in fact part of a systems building framework. Also, agree with the the point I think that was raised by Ms. Arnice in her remarks that she sent over about COA being a needed accountability partner to the county. I think that's a good one for us to keep in mind, because as we're thinking about an accountability partner to the county, what we are hearing overwhelmingly from the non-county government folks on COA, as well as during public testimony, is that grant making, the work that COA is doing is both functional and very much desirable, and there is great concern about that being handicapped in any way. One more note on the direct services component. I know that there were over the last year, there's been discussions about that because of funds that COA wished to spend in a certain way, and HHS having concerns about that due to the meaning of direct services. And I know that I had conversations with the county attorney that kept me feeling very comfortable with the way that COA had proposed to spend the funds, and I know that they were eventually allowed to then spend out at least some of the funds that they had time to spend out in that way. So it was not there was not a legal conflict there, which means that we are free to have, I think, the conversation that we're having now about being able to allow them to continue to use the funds that way, and just figuring out how we can make sure that that's clear. So I really appreciate the conversation today and look forward to the continued conversation. I yield.
Thank you, Councilmember Mink. I mean, I think final word here for now, and I'm hoping we can come back in September as a joint committee with Ms. Anais here and the full team, and we all have more time to think about all this and process and come back with some of the language and recommendations we've asked for. Obviously, we want you all to be on the same page as much as possible. That's been my plea since the beginning. We've made a lot of progress. And that doesn't mean you agree on everything, but I personally am comfortable with COA, particularly using private dollars to grant in service of systems building. Now, obviously, there's some people think that there's a conflict there. I don't think there necessarily has to be. So I just think I would encourage additional conversation. Sounds like last night was a good start about how we can get to that point. I take your point about the concern around contractual management of COA and how public funds would be used. I think that's a separate conversation, but open to having all of that. So so the idea will be we will come back in September and we'll identify a date with the co-chairs and both committees. I think we've made some progress here today on several of the issues. When's your next board meeting?
Funny you should ask that. So last night we were saying we probably need to have the board come back again in August to continue these discussions. And I think potentially the executive committee might hold some other smaller meetings in between to continue the conversations moving forward, and invite any member of the board who can join those executive committee conversations to continue to dive in and refine.
We could do October if you want to give your folks off in August. I mean, we'll see what happens. But
yeah.
Definitely, the sooner the better. We want to try to get this buttoned up by the end of the year. So that's great to hear. So with that, we will let folks go to their lunches and appreciate the conversation and all the work that you're doing to make sure our kids and families have access. With that, we're adjourned.